Chapter 363. Hundreds of miles away from the imperial capital, a silhouette stepped through the air and a powerful aura surged around his body. From time to time, there would be rumbling sounds of blood and chi. It was as if the waves of the vast ocean were crashing into a wolf. The sound was like thunder exploding in the air. The Shura sect overlord, Duan Ling, walked in the air. With every step he took, his figure would travel a great distance. His current cultivation had already reached the half-step divine realm, and he was just a step away from breaking the shackles of the 9th grade Supreme Being realm and stepping into the 10th grade divine realm. However, because the 10,000 bestial flames had been snatched away by a 7th grade battle saint, he was unable to take the remaining half a step. Even so, his physical body had already reached an extremely terrifying level. At the very least, it was more than a level stronger than a peak Supreme Being. Duan Ling's face was as cold as ice. He manipulated a little bit of the power of the heavens and the earth and infused it into his body, allowing him to fly even faster. The 10th grade divine realm is a big realm. The supremacy realm is divided into early, middle, late, and peak stages. But the divine realm is different. Duan Ling thought to himself as he sped along. He came from outside the southern region, so he had a much deeper understanding of the 10th grade divine realm than the natives of the southern region. A pinnacle 9th grade sovereign would be able to step into the 10th grade divine realm after breaking through one of the shackles. However, this was only the weakest 10th grade divine realm. Since the supremacy realm was divided into different levels, the 10th grade divine realm was definitely divided into different levels as well. The higher one's realm was, the greater the disparity in strength would be. This was because every tiny breakthrough would have a huge impact on one's strength. The division of strength in the 10th grade divine realm was different from that of the supremacy realm. The supremacy realm severed its first shackle and stepped into the first stage of the divine realm, the divine physique realm. There were 5 supreme being shackles in the body of a supreme being, one for each of the 4 limbs and one for the head. Every time a shackle was broken, the physical body would be cleansed by the energy of heaven and earth, becoming even more powerful. Even if he had only broken one supreme being shackle, he would be able to crush any supreme being expert. After the divine physique echelon, there was still the second stage of the divine echelon. Anyone who could reach that stage would be considered a top-notch expert in any sect on the Hidden Dragon continent. As for the third level of the divine state, that was a level that Duan Ling had never come into contact with before. However, he knew that the existence of that realm was absolutely a sect-suppressing existence of each sect in the Hidden Dragon continent. As Duan Ling exhaled a mouthful of foul air, the look in his eyes became sharper and fiercer. He was not like the pedantic natives of the southern border. These natives had limited vision and did not know that the place they lived in was just a remote place. He, Duan Ling, was a man with a goal. He wanted to reach the peak of his strength and return to the Hidden Dragon continent. He wanted to let those who once bullied him know that he, Duan Ling, was not trash. Duan Ling took a step forward as he suppressed the emotions in his heart. His figure instantly dashed forward. No matter how much he thought about it, if he wanted to make another breakthrough in his cultivation, he had to retrieve the 10,000 bestial flames. With the help of the 10,000 bestial flames, he was confident that he could break through the shackles of the Supreme Being realm and successfully step into the first stage of the 10th grade divine realm, the divine physique echelon. Below Duan Ling was a majestic army marching slowly. This was Ji Qingyu's army, which had already retreated from the imperial capital and the large counties where the imperial capital was located. After receiving the high priest's help, they regained control of the situation and charged back into the capital. Amidst the army, a carriage slowly swayed. The high priest, wearing an ice-cold mask, sat cross-legged in the carriage. Jade talismans floated in front of her. She seemed to be arranging some kind of mysterious talisman magic array. The army slowly advanced, and soon they saw the towering and majestic city of the Light Wind Empire. Ji Qingyu sat on a horse, clad in armor. He looked at the light-wind imperial capital with a complicated expression. He had charged over once again, but this time he was depressed. He was a little afraid. With Fong Fong's little store in the imperial capital, who could break through? Even the Shura sect venerable was mercilessly killed by the supreme beast in the store. If they attacked the city again, wouldn't that make them idiots? Therefore, when the Shura sect high priest sought him out, he refused. But sometimes, in the face of absolute power, he still felt a little helpless. On the city wall of the light-wind imperial capital, Ji Qingxue was so stunned that he was almost at a loss. What he had seen today had already exceeded the scope of what he could understand in his entire life. 2 supreme beasts were slaughtered just like that. The 2 supreme beasts that scared him to the point that his legs turned to jelly and he thought the Light Wind Empire was about to be destroyed were turned into corpses in just half a day. One of them was even dismembered by Onurbu. Looking at Onurbu's excited eyes, it seemed like he treated the supreme beast as food. Supreme beast food. Onurbu really knew how to play. He had never seen anyone treat supreme beasts as food, because supreme beasts were existences that stood at the pinnacle of the southern region, overlooking all living things. Could you imagine the strange feeling of being turned into a dish? After the initial shock and fear, the supreme elder heaved a sigh of relief. His complexion recovered a lot. However, when he looked at the fat black dog beside Bufong, his eyes couldn't help but narrow. This inconspicuous black dog was in existence at least at the same level as Duan Ling. He didn't expect there to be such an existence in the southern region. When Duan Ling arrives, there would be another great battle to watch. The supreme elder squinted his eyes and chuckled as he stroked his white beard. He didn't move and continued to stand on the city wall. He casually shot out white jade talismans that floated at every corner of the city wall. It seemed like he was setting up some kind of magic array for the imperial city. Enai Yin and Yi Xiling happily rushed down the city wall and ran toward Bufong. After Blackie threw the supreme fire dragon to Bufong, it yawned lazily and strode back to the store's entrance with enchanting cat-like steps. It found a comfortable position and lay down. After a while, it fell asleep. Bufong retracted his gaze from the fat dog and looked at the scarlet dragon. The fire dragon, which had lost its breath of life, no longer exuded the pressure of a supreme beast. The flickering flames on its body also became dim. Rumble. The sound of rubble falling came from afar. 2 figures crawled out from the ruins with faces full of fear. They were the 2 supreme being experts of the godly temple of the wildlands. At this moment, they were in a sorry state. Looking at the fire dragon that had lost all signs of life, only fear remained in their eyes. The muscles on their bodies were trembling violently. 2 claws. Just 2 claws. The supreme fire dragon that shook the 100,000 mountains was killed just like that. The supreme beast that guarded the 10,000 bestial flames was gone just like that. How could there be such a terrifying existence in this world? Are you King kidding me? An existence that could kill a supreme beast with 2 claws was staying in the capital of a mortal empire as a watchdog? Even if one was pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger, there was no need to do such a thing. This was a lie, a blatant lie. If they were given another chance, they would never have chosen to come to the imperial city. They would have run as far away as possible. There's still 2 fellows who aren't dead. Bufong was preparing to deal with the supreme fire dragon's corpse. He loved to deal with dragon meat. Whether it was braised or cooked into sweet and sour ribs, it was delicious. However, the 2 supreme being experts from the godly temple of the wildlands surprised him. He had always thought that they were dead. The 2 supreme beings widened their eyes as they looked at Bufong. Their nostrils flared as they panted heavily. Then, boom. The 2 of them didn't even look back as they sped out of the imperial capital. To hell with the 10,000 bestial flames. They were about to lose their lives. Bufong calmly looked at the 2 fleeing figures, and the corners of his mouth twitched. He raised his hand and patted Whitey, who was standing beside him, on its belly. Then, he continued to deal with the supreme fire dragon. Xiao Bai's eyes flickered. The gray light in his eyes was cold and merciless. Rumble. The metal wings on his back unfurled. Waves of energy surged. His body turned into a bolt of lightning as he dashed toward the two supreme beings from the godly temple of the wildlands. Kid, one should forgive and forget. One of the supreme beings from the godly temple of the wildlands shouted. They were truly frightened. Troublemakers will be stripped as an example to others. Xiao Bai's eyes flickered. His ice-cold voice reverberated throughout the entire city. Stripped? The two supreme beings were stunned. They felt as if their bodies had been hit by a tremendous force. Their eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. Xiao Bai hovered in the air. He pulled his fists out from the abdomens of the two supreme beings and pounded them on their backs. With a loud bang, the two supreme beings were smashed to the ground, stirring up a cloud of dust. Xiao Bai spread his metal wings. Suddenly, a gust of wind howled and blew away the dust. His body fell into the ruins, and two figures were thrown out. Rip! The sound of clothes being torn was so clear in the quiet imperial city. The two supreme beings from the godly temple of the wildlands were sent flying. Their faces were ashen as they fell out of the imperial city. The ground outside the imperial city was filled with holes. Their clothes were torn. They were made from the skin of an 8th-grade spirit beast. They were priceless. However, this wasn't the main point. The main point was that they were stripped. Two dignified supreme beings were stripped of their clothes. The two supreme beings were naked. Their white buttocks streaked across the sky and landed outside the imperial city. They felt a little stifled. It was simply unbearable to watch. Everyone in the imperial city was dumbfounded. The crazy clothes-stripping demon was worthy of being called a crazy clothes-stripping demon. Ouyang Xiaoyi was so excited. Her small face was flushed. As expected, even though Xiao Bai had transformed, his nature as the crazy clothes-stripping demon was still the same. It was still the same familiar method, and it was still the same familiar smell. Xiao Bai was still Xiao Bai. Chapter 364. Supreme Being experts were the pinnacle existences in the southern region. They had always looked down on the common people of the southern region. They were high and mighty like gods. However, when a god was stripped naked and thrown out, that lofty and mighty aura collapsed in an instant. The reverence the crowd had for the supreme beings disappeared with a loud rumble. Snort, after being dumbfounded for a while, the crowd couldn't help but burst into laughter. Their laughter wasn't loud and seemed to be suppressed. However, it was still laughter. The two supreme beings of the godly temple of the wildlands awkwardly stood up. They covered their nether regions, their faces filled with shame and indignation. They glared at Xiao Bai, who was floating in the air, and were about to throw out some harsh words. However, before they could say anything, their pupils shrank. They saw the metal wings on Xiao Bai's back suddenly flap. Damn! Again! The supreme beings of the godly temple of the wildlands felt as though their hair was about to stand on end. They turned around and dashed away without looking back, stirring up a cloud of dust. Their fair and clean buttocks were faintly discernible in the cloud of dust. Xiao Bai retracted his metal wings and floated down to the ground. The grayish-white color in his eyes gradually disappeared, and in the end his eyes started to change into 3 different colors. Bufang patted the body of the supreme fire dragon. Although the fire dragon had already perished, its body was still extremely tough. After all, it was the body of a supreme beast, and it wasn't something to be underestimated. The golden dragon bone kitchen knife appeared in Bufang's hand, and as he infused it with true energy, the golden dragon bone kitchen knife suddenly became resplendent. Bufang held the big kitchen knife single-handedly and aimed it at the supreme dragon's neck. He narrowed his eyes. Snort! With a muffled sound, the golden dragon bone kitchen knife penetrated the body of the supreme fire dragon. Then, with a twist of the knife, Bufang exhaled. Holding the kitchen knife, he started to run. After running for a few steps, he suddenly stopped. Crushed stones flew everywhere. With a light shout, he flipped his kitchen knife and directly cut off the supreme fire dragon's spine. When making sweet and sour ribs, the best meat was the ribs. Therefore, Bu Fong specially cut off the ribs along with the ribs. Bu Fong grabbed the fire dragon's rib and placed the rest of the fire dragon's body into the system's dimensional storage. Then, he carried the fire dragon's rib and walked into the store. After placing the piece of supreme dragon meat in the kitchen, Bu Fong washed his hands with clean water before returning to the store. The troublemakers were finally dealt with. At the same time, Bu Fong could free up his hands to cook the Buddha jumps over the wall soup in an attempt to save Xiao Meng and see if he could remove the poison in his body. Xiao Meng's face was covered with a gray aura of death. The poison had already spread to his entire body. His meridians were corroded by the poison and turned into a grayish-black color. It was a hideous and terrifying sight. Xiao Yinyu and Xiao Xiaolong looked at Bu Fong with hope, hoping that Bu Fong could quickly cook the elixir cuisine to save their father. "Help him sit down first," Bu Fong said calmly. Inside the store, the Five Stripes Path Understanding tree emitted a dense spirit energy that made people feel refreshed. Under the influence of this spirit energy, Xiao Meng's condition seemed to have improved a lot. Bu Fong glanced at the crowd and did not say anything. He clasped his hands behind his back and paced around the store a few times. Then, he glanced at Xiao Meng once more before turning around and entering the kitchen. Xiao Xiaolong originally wanted to go in and help, but was stopped by Bu Fong at the door. Enai Yin and Yi Xiling also entered the store. She was a little excited. Was owner Bu planning to start cooking again? In her heart, she was really looking forward to it. As for Bu Fong, he walked into the kitchen but did not start cooking immediately. This time, he wanted to cook the Buddha jumps over the wall soup. This dish was not easy to cook because it required too many ingredients. When the spirit energy was mixed together, it would be extremely difficult to harmonize. However, it was fortunate that Bu Fong could control the Black Turtle Constellation Walk. With the help of the walk, Bu Fong's control over the spirit energy of the ingredients would be much easier. It was not a bad idea to give a try. In order to cook the Buddha jumps over the wall soup, a container was required. The system had already prepared one for Bu Fong. From the cupboard, it took out a huge porcelain jar that looked like a wine jar. The lid of the jar was carved with a Buddha with a kind face and overflowing with blessings. The Buddha was vivid and lifelike, as if it was about to step down from the top of the jar. Bu Fong was a little dazed as he looked at it. He could not help but be startled. As expected, this porcelain jar was somewhat unusual. However, Bu Fong did not think too much about it. After he washed the porcelain jar, he placed it aside and began to prepare the ingredients. The ingredients for the Buddha jumps over the wall soup were very complicated. It was made with 18 main ingredients and 12 supplementary ingredients. These main ingredients were all kinds of different spirit beasts: blood phoenix chicken, red-headed duck, supreme dragon claw, toad leg meat, black spirit abalone. There were many other ingredients. These ingredients were all very precious. Moreover, there were supreme ingredients like the supreme dragon claw and toad leg meat. It was simply terrifying. If these ingredients were to be known by others, the people outside would simply go crazy. Supreme ingredients, something that had never been heard of before. Green smoke curled around Bu Fong's hand, and the dragon bone kitchen knife appeared in his hand. With a turn of the knife, he took out a piece of supreme toad leg meat. This piece of meat was like a transparent, gelatinous substance. Abundant spirit energy flowed on it. Bu Fong patted the meat with the dragon bone kitchen knife and made a few cuts on it. Then, he placed it at the bottom of the porcelain jar. Next, he began to prepare the supreme dragon claw. The supreme fire dragon's dragon claw was very big. Bu Fong did not take the whole claw. Instead, he chopped off 2 of the dragon claws. After cutting off the sharp bone claws, he washed them with the Heaven Alps spirit spring water and placed them in the jar. After preparing the blood phoenix chicken and red-headed duck, they were all spirit beasts. Even though their grades were not as terrifying as the supreme beasts, they were still quite rare. He placed all the main ingredients into the porcelain jar, which was already a little full. Next, Bu Fong began to prepare to put the supplementary ingredients into the porcelain jar. Some of these supplementary ingredients were spirit herbs that Bu Fong collected in the 100,000 mountains. Some of them were the eggs of a spirit beast. The most important one was the gelatinous meat of the demonic fish that Bufong killed in the southern city. He also placed it into the jar. He placed it into a big pot. So many ingredients were placed together. Bufong had not even started to cook, but the spirit energy from the ingredients almost caused the porcelain jar to explode. Bufong adjusted the ingredients in the wok and took out a jar of ice-hard jade urn wine. He poured the ice-hard jade urn wine into the porcelain jar, filling up the ingredients. After pouring half of the wine, Bufong added half of the Heaven Alps spirit spring water. Everything was ready. Finally, he took out a purple spirit fruit leaf and wrapped it around the mouth of the porcelain jar. The lid, which was engraved with a lifelike Buddha, covered the porcelain jar. All the preparations were done. Lifting up the heavy porcelain jar, Bufong exhaled. He took out the black turtle constellation wok. With a thought, the wok revolved in the air and enlarged. When it reached a certain size, it stopped. Bufong poured out some dragon blood from the system's dimensional storage. The scalding dragon blood seemed to be boiling in the black turtle constellation wok. He placed the porcelain jar of the Buddha jumps over the wall soup into the black turtle constellation wok and let the dragon blood soak the Buddha jumps over the wall soup. Bufong took a step back, and his face became serious. The next step was the most important part of cooking the Buddha jumps over the wall soup. Bufong's face turned red. He opened his mouth and spat out a golden flame. The flame entered the bottom of the black turtle constellation wok and burned in a small corner. It gathered and started to burn fiercely under the wok. Bufong's mind was completely immersed in the black turtle constellation wok. He started to sense the spirit energy of the ingredients inside the Buddha jumps over the wall soup, outside the imperial city. Finally, Ji Qingyu's army gradually approached. The guards on top of the city walls immediately noticed the mighty army and hurriedly reported the news to Ji Qingxue. Ji Qingxue's face immediately tensed up. He hurriedly returned to the city wall and looked at the mighty army in the distance. His heart sank. Above the sky, a figure walked in the air with his hands clasped behind his back. Thunder rumbled and his blood and energy roared. It was as if he was about to set off a monstrous gale. This was an unruly and unrestrained figure. He was overbearing and terrifying. A blood-red Shura sect sword shuttled around his body. It was incomparably sharp. Duan Ling's eyes were like lightning as he stared at the light-wind imperial city. With a thought, the energy of the 10,000 bestial flames soared into the sky. It was as resplendent as a star in the night sky. The 10,000 bestial flames will belong to me. This time, let's see how you can escape. His blood and energy were like raging waves beating against the shore, surging into the sky. Duan Ling exhaled, and his face became cold. Chapter 365. The black turtle constellation wok floated above the kitchen. As the golden 10,000 bestial flame burned vigorously beneath it, the patterns on the black turtle constellation wok began to glow. That brilliance lit up and converged into the image of a mysterious black tortoise, causing Bufong to feel somewhat dazzled. A thick smell of blood spread throughout the kitchen. This smell was scalding and fishy, causing one to frown involuntarily. This was the smell of dragon blood. As the black turtle constellation wok heated up, the dragon blood began to boil and bubbles began to emerge. As soon as those bubbles appeared, they were shattered by the spirit energy within. Once they were shattered, the spirit energy gushed out and formed new bubbles. This was the blood of a supreme fire dragon. It was originally like boiling lava, and now, under the heat of the heaven and earth obsidian flame, its temperature rose even higher. The spirit energy seemed to be boiling from the heat. Blood-colored spirit energy gushed out from the dragon blood and rose up to meet the porcelain jar. The temperature of the porcelain jar was not high, and there was also the ice-hard jade urn wine within it. Therefore, the blood-colored spirit energy directly soaked into the porcelain jar. On the surface of the brown porcelain jar, streaks of blood that seemed to be dripping with blood slowly flowed down the walls of the jar. The gentle, smiling Buddha was also covered with blood streaks. In an instant, he became ferocious and terrifying, as if he had transformed into a blood Buddha. The supreme dragon blood was filled with essence. As the black turtle constellation wok simmered, the essence would seep into the ingredients within the porcelain jar. Bufang pulled out a chair and sat down. This time, he did not curl up. Instead, he straightened his back and looked extremely serious and serious. He released his true energy, which transformed into a dense spider web that wrapped around the black turtle constellation wok. Through the black turtle constellation wok, he was able to sense every single change in the spiritual energy of the ingredients in the porcelain jar. This was true energy cooking. With the black turtle constellation wok, the level of his true energy cooking had risen to another level. Within the Buddha jumps over the wall soup, since the meat of the two supreme beasts was placed at the bottom of the jar, it was the first place where the dragon blood essence would evaporate. Moreover, the spirituality of the 10,000 bestial flames would seep up from the bottom of the jar and fuse with the dish. From what Bufang could sense, the ingredients of the two supreme beasts were emitting a dense radiance, as though they were scorching suns. The spiritual energy within them was extremely mottled, as though it wanted to stir up the spiritual energy of all the ingredients in the wok. The higher the grade of the ingredients, the more difficult it was to cook. The reason was that their spiritual energy was too majestic, making it harder to control. Bufang's true qi seeped into the ingredients like silk threads, like many slender little hands that were adjusting the spirit qi contained in the ingredients. Bufang's true qi was very gentle, like a docile kitten. The spiritual energy of those ingredients was very violent, like roaring hounds. Logically speaking, Bufang's true qi shouldn't be able to shake off the violent spiritual energy. However, this was the essence of true energy cooking. It didn't require a powerful, true qi. It only required the ability to calm down the violent spiritual energy. Bufang was very adept at controlling his true qi. As the temperature rose, he easily calmed down the violent spiritual energy. Gulp! Gulp! The dragon blood gradually rose, and the entire kitchen seemed to be filled with a blood-red radiance. The people in the store didn't smell the slightest fragrance. Instead, a dense smell of blood wafted out from the kitchen. This smell was extremely intense, and many people covered their noses in discomfort. What kind of smell was this? It was so unpleasant. This was the first time they smelled such an unpleasant smell from Onarbu's kitchen. What kind of dish was Onarbu cooking? Yin was more knowledgeable, and her expression gradually changed. This is dragon blood. Dragon blood? The others were stunned for a moment, and they looked at each other as if they had thought of something. Blackie had just killed a supreme fire dragon with 2 paws. Could it be that Onarbu released the blood of that fire dragon? Was he using dragon blood to cook? Everyone's hearts were instantly stirred. The supreme dragon blood was such a precious item, and it was actually used to cook. Only Onarbu would be so extravagant. For a moment, they didn't feel that the smell of the dragon blood was unpleasant. In reality, Bufang didn't use the dragon blood to cook. He only used it as an ingredient for the Buddha jumps over the wall soup. However, Yin and the others didn't know about this. Otherwise, they would be even more astonished. Blackie, who was lying at the entrance of the store, couldn't help but open its eyes when it smelled the dragon blood. It was a little astonished, and it didn't seem to know what Bufang was cooking. Its nose twitched, and it wanted to discern what Bufang was cooking. However, its eyes quickly widened. It realized that it couldn't tell what Bufang was cooking. This kid, could it be that he was researching a new dish? This new dish seemed to be quite amazing. It actually used 2 supreme ingredients. Blackie's heart was suddenly filled with curiosity. It suddenly wanted to taste the dish, and it couldn't help but stick out its tongue. Its eyes were shining brightly. Outside the imperial city, the mighty army kept approaching, and soon they reached the city. The oppressive feeling brought by the army once again assaulted Ji Qingxue, who was standing on the city wall, and made him feel suffocated. Why did so many soldiers appear here? Where was the army of the Light Wind Empire? Where was the army of the Light Wind Empire that chased after Ji Qingyu? Facing this mighty army, Ji Qingshue's heart was filled with fear. There were no other soldiers in the imperial city other than the city guards. The number of city guards was only around 10,000. How could they fight against the army below? He had just dealt with the two supreme beasts that almost destroyed the imperial city, and he had chased away two supreme beings. Now, a huge army was approaching. More importantly, this army appeared out of the blue. Why didn't anyone from Ji Qingshue's army report this news? Duan Ling stood proudly in the sky, and his robe fluttered in the wind. He didn't look at the army below. This army wasn't his idea. In his opinion, there wasn't much difference between having an army and not having an army. The main thing was that the high priestess wanted the army here, and Duan Ling was helpless. With his half-step divine cultivation, why would he need the help of an army of mortals? What a joke. It seemed like the high priestess still didn't understand what the so-called half-step divine realm was. Although she hadn't completely broken through the shackles of a supreme being, she was already incomparable to an ordinary supreme being. The supreme elder stood on the city wall with his hands clasped behind his back. His white hair and beard fluttered in the wind. He seemed to have the demeanor of an immortal. He stepped on the air and slowly rose into the sky. His gaze was calm as he looked at Duan Ling, who was in the sky. Although the pressure of heaven and earth emitted from Duan Ling's body made the supreme elder's heart palpitate, he didn't back down. All of a sudden, a ray of sword light pierced through the sky from a distance. The sword energy wreaked havoc as it transformed into a graceful figure riding on a sword. His laughter resounded in the sky as he landed beside the supreme elder. The sword light dissipated, revealing the figure of the White Cloud Villa's villa master, Wu Mu. The supreme elder looked at Wu Mu with a strange expression. He thought that Wu Mu wouldn't come because he was injured. Wu Mu's heroic spirit soared into the sky as he looked at Duan Ling. The cloud-rising sword flew up from beneath his feet and landed in his hand. It was a very elegant sight. "Let me have a taste of the half-step divine realm strength," Wu Mu said with a smile. The sword light in his hand flickered, and dense sword energy circulated around it. The supreme elder was startled. Then he stroked his beard and laughed. Duan Ling looked at the two of them indifferently. The corners of his mouth curled up, and a cold expression gradually appeared on his face. "If the two of you scram now, I will spare your lives. But if you continue to be so stubborn, then you can die." The Shura sect sword, which was flying around him, suddenly appeared in his hand. A monstrous sword will instantly soared into the sky. Then, the pressure of heaven and earth gushed out from his body and surged toward the supreme elder and Wu Mu. The supreme elder calmly stroked his beard. Then he formed a seal with his hand, and a dazzling light beam shot out from the Light Wind Empire city walls. The light beam was filled with surging energy. The Celestial Arcanum Sex Array ranking, the Big Dipper killing array. The Supreme Elder stared at Duan Ling and finally took out his trump card. Wu Mu also laughed heartily. He held the cloud, rising sword and pointed it at Duan Ling. The energy on his body continued to rise. The sword will soared into the sky and exploded 3 times in a row, forcing his energy to a terrifying level. The White Cloud Villa's secret technique, sword will triple explosion. Duan Ling's expression didn't change. His tall and sturdy body was unfazed. The invisible supreme being's shackles appeared on his left arm and emitted a clanking sound. He raised his sword and a blood-red light circulated around it. The Shurasek's sword will wreak havoc. Blackie, who was lying in the store, suddenly let out a cry of surprise. It turned its head and looked toward the Imperial City's gate. A half-step divine realm expert actually came? Bufang's ability to stir up trouble is getting higher and higher. Chapter 366. Ji Qingxue stared dumbfoundedly at the 3 people confronting each other in the sky. He couldn't understand why the atmosphere suddenly became so tense. These 3 people were all supreme beings. Without a doubt, they were all supreme beings. The terrifying aura emanating from their bodies caused the people atop the city walls to tremble in fear. This was the aura of a supreme being. It was extremely frightening. Moreover, Ji Chengshue's complexion became even paler when he looked at the man shrouded in a blood-red radiance. He felt as if he was facing a whole world when he looked at that man. His entire mind trembled, and he couldn't help but want to kneel on the ground. This was the majesty of a superior being. His opponent's cultivation was completely beyond his imagination. It wasn't just Ji Chengshue's side. Even Ji Qingyu's army was restless. Every soldier raised their heads and looked at the three terrifying experts confronting each other. Their hearts were filled with fear. Beams of light shot out from the top of the city wall and landed on the white-haired, white-bearded old man. It was like a huge starlight armor that was filled with killing intent. A huge starlight giant was wearing this armor. This was the Celestial Arcanum Sect's precious array, the Big Dipper slaughtering array. It was the most destructive array in the southern region. If Duanling hadn't broken through to the half-step divine realm, the Supreme Elder wouldn't have wanted to set up this array. This was because this array was set up at the cost of one's life force. It was formed by communicating with the Big Dipper stars in the sky. Its might was boundless, and its battle prowess was monstrous. The starlight was dazzling, and the earth energy was chilling. A giant phantom formed by starlight emerged. This phantom was clad in armor from head to toe. It held a sword in its left hand and a halberd in its right. Its imposing manner soared to the sky. Its eyes were filled with anger, and its killing intent was directed at Duanling. Wumu's aura was also rising rapidly. The White Cloud Villa was able to stand tall in the illusory spirit swamp. It definitely had a strong foundation. Wumu's sword intent was extremely strong. Coupled with the White Cloud Villa's secret technique, he unleashed his sword intent regardless of the cost. Its might was not any weaker than the array set up by the Supreme Elder. The Supreme Elder looked at Wumu in surprise. It seemed like this guy was really going to go all out. However, why would Wumu risk his life regardless of the cost? This made him a little puzzled. Perhaps only Wumu himself would understand this. Perhaps he had been suppressing his anger in his heart and urgently needed to vent it out. Duanling coldly smiled. Even though his left hand was dragging a chain, his aura wasn't any weaker than Wumu's or the Supreme Elder's. His aura alone was able to suppress both of their auras. This was simply unheard of. Was this the power of a half-step divine realm expert? With the Shurasek sword in his hand, he took a step forward, stirring up the pressure of heaven and earth as he charged toward the Supreme Elder and Wumu. Anyone who stands in my way of obtaining the 10,000 bestial flame shall die. Torrential, blood-colored sword chi swept out, as if it had turned into a gale that blotted out the sky, covering everything. This sword carried the pressure of a half-step divine warrior and Duanling's unstoppable aura as it charged toward the two of them. Wumu let out a long roar as his long hair fluttered in the wind. Tens of thousands of strands of sword energy erupted from the cloud, rising sword in his hand, and poured down on Duanling. The gigantic starlight giant also brandished the giant halberd in his hand, causing the air to wail as if it couldn't bear the heavy burden. The attacks of the three collided in the air, producing a deafening explosion. This explosion brought about a wave of energy that dispersed in all directions. This wave of energy was so monstrous that it almost overturned Ji Chengxue and the others on the city wall. Meanwhile, Ji Qingyu's army had already been thrown into disarray. In the sky, three different colored energy waves collided with each other. The Supreme Elder wore a solemn expression as he pinched his magic arts with both hands. His aura fluctuated unceasingly as his long hair fluttered in the wind. Wumu forcefully pushed out the cloud, rising sword, as if he wanted to pierce through everything. Their gazes were like lightning as they stared at Duanling. Even though they were facing a half-step divine warrior, they didn't show any signs of retreating. As the three of them battled in the sky, the shockwaves of their battle spread out, causing the citizens of the imperial city to tremble in fear. They were afraid that they would be killed by the shockwaves. Ji Chengshua's complexion was also deathly pale. This kind of battle was simply beyond his knowledge. The people in the store also sensed the battle. They all walked out of the store and looked toward the city wall. There, in the sky, 3 waves of light collided with each other. A trace of worry appeared on Ni Yan's beautiful face. She knew that among the 3 terrifying auras, one of them belonged to the Supreme Elder of the Celestial Arcanum Sect. The Supreme Elder was the backbone of the Celestial Arcanum Sect. Nothing could happen to him. Blackie, on the other hand, wasn't interested in the battle. It only glanced at it indifferently, yawned, and went back to sleep. In the kitchen, Bufang closed his eyes tightly. The true energy in his energy core was circulating rapidly. Countless threads of true energy covered the black turtle constellation walk. He sensed the changes in the spirit energy of the ingredients in the Buddha jumps over the wall soup. Bufang's expression was extremely solemn. He could not afford to make even the slightest mistake, so his forehead was covered in fine beads of sweat. The beads of sweat rolled down his cheeks and rolled down his cheeks. The kitchen was extremely quiet. The shockwaves of the battle outside the Imperial City and the earth-shattering explosions couldn't reach the kitchen. Perhaps, at this moment, in Bufang's eyes, there was only the Buddha jumps over the wall soup. Bufang felt that he had underestimated the difficulty of cooking this Buddha jumps over the wall soup. After adding the ingredients of 2 supreme beasts, the difficulty of cooking it was extremely high. Bufang, who was using true energy to cook, felt that he was both mentally and physically exhausted. He clenched his teeth and persevered. He was afraid that the moment he relaxed, all his efforts would go to waste, and this wok of Buddha jumps over the wall soup would collapse. If that happened, the losses would outweigh the gains. Even though it was difficult, wasn't this also a test for him? Bufang clenched his teeth and didn't give up. As a man who swore to become the god of cooking who stood at the top of the food chain in the fantasy world, how could he retreat because of such a small difficulty? If he retreated, it would be a huge blow to his heart of cooking path. This was definitely not a good thing. Gurgle. The dragon blood in the wok boiled even more. Occasionally, the dragon blood would splash out, bringing with it a scalding aura, and it would burn Bufang's outstretched arm. Bufang held his breath, and his eyes were like torches. The porcelain jar in the black turtle constellation wok became even more radiant, and the blood-red threads on it quickly faded away. However, there was still not a single trace of fragrance wafting out of the kitchen. Bufang's gaze was fixed on the smiling Buddha on top of the Buddha jumps over the wall soup. In his mind, dense amounts of true energy continuously mixed all the ingredients in the porcelain jar. When all the ingredients were mixed together, it was like a hodgepodge. This wasn't like the first-grade wok. Compared to the first-grade wok, the difficulty of cooking the Buddha jumps over the wall soup was much higher. Sweat unceasingly dripped down from Bufang's body, soaking his clothes. Bufang panted heavily. Suddenly, his eyes shrank. The Buddha on the lid of the porcelain jar seemed to be even more vivid and real. It was as though there was a formless laughter lingering in the kitchen. A golden ray of light shot out from the Buddha and soared into the sky. When Bufang saw that ray of light, the taut string in his heart finally loosened. He straightened his back, but all the energy in his body seemed to have been sucked out. He curled up on the chair, panting heavily. His sweat had completely soaked him. However, the corners of his mouth slightly twitched. Damn it, I finally finished cooking. I'm so tired. Even someone as calm as Bufang couldn't help but complain inwardly. However, his heart was filled with joy. He could feel that the moment he finished cooking the Buddha jumps over the wall soup, his level of true energy cooking seemed to have broken through a barrier, and he had achieved a greater improvement. Within the black turtle constellation wok, the heaven and earth obsidian flame dispersed. The dragon blood was no longer boiling. However, the golden ray of light on the porcelain jar of the Buddha jumps over the wall soup was still as dazzling as before. It shone so brightly that the Buddha looked as though it was about to jump out. Bufang's face was filled with exhaustion as he took out the porcelain jar from the Black Turtle constellation walk. The dragon blood in the walk had lost its color, and it became like clear water. However, at this moment, Bufang's attention wasn't on the fading dragon blood. It was on the Buddha jumps over the wall soup. The Buddha jumps over the wall soup didn't emit any fragrance, and it made Bufang slightly happy. The more fragrant it was, the more successful the Buddha jumps over the wall soup was. Wrapped in true energy, Bufang patted the Buddha with his palm, and a buzzing sound resounded. The lid of the Buddha flew up, and it looked as though it had really jumped out. A dazzling ray of light shot out from the porcelain jar. The purple spirit fruit leaf was completely dyed gold, and a golden light revolved around it. As for Bufang, while facing the dazzling golden light, he reached out his hand and gently opened the purple spirit fruit leaf. Chapter 367. Bang, bang, bang. Deafening explosions resounded. Shock waves rippled outwards, giving rise to howling gales. Above the light wind Imperial City, 3 terrifying figures were colliding with each other. Every time they collided, a violent explosion would resound. Everyone who was paying attention to the battle couldn't help but feel their hearts skip a beat. The Supreme Elder and Wu Mu were getting more and more frightened as they fought. Every time they collided, they could feel the energy within their bodies rapidly diminishing. After all, this energy didn't belong to them, so it was hard for them to maintain it for long. On the other hand, Duanling's face remained calm after every collision. It was obvious that he still had some energy left. Half a step into the divine realm was indeed powerful. Although the half a step into the divine realm didn't completely surpass the Supreme Being realm, it was still very close to the divine realm. The Big Dipper killing array was very powerful. However, the Supreme Elder was getting old, so he couldn't maintain it for long. His face had already turned deathly pale. After a few clashes, the Supreme Elder knew that he was unable to stop the Shura sect overlord, Duanling's swoosh. A blood-red sword light slashed down. The starlight giant was instantly smashed into pieces, turning into starlight that filled the sky and dissipated. The Supreme Elder's white hair fluttered in the wind. His aura suddenly weakened, and his face became haggard. His entire body fell from the sky and landed heavily on the ground. He spat out a mouthful of blood, and his breathing was extremely weak. Wu Mu's sword intent had also begun to weaken. After all, he was only a supreme being. Although the third explosion of the sword intent temporarily increased his fighting prowess, it was too much of a burden on his body. Moreover, it also caused great damage to the sword intent he comprehended. He slashed out with his sword. It was like a flying immortal sword, which shone with a dazzling radiance. However, the Shurasek sword intent was even more overbearing. It carried a surging killing intent and directly bombarded his sword intent. Wu Mu, who was in the sky, spat out a mouthful of blood. His face was pale, and the semi-divine tool, the cloud-rising sword, was sent flying. Bang! They fell from the sky. The 2 peak supreme beings of the southern region were defeated just like that. Duanling stood proudly in the sky, holding the blood-red Shura sect sword in his hand. A blood-red radiance that almost covered the sky burst out from his back. His aura was terrifying. A ray of morning radiance shone out from the distant morning star. It was like a long sword slicing through the starry sky, whistling past. Duanling's expression was cold as he stared at the 2 experts who had collapsed on the city wall. Their auras were extremely weak. Finally, he could not help but laugh out loud. So what if he was a peak expert of the southern region? He was still defeated by Duanling. When Duanling stepped into the divine physique echelon, the Supreme Elder of the Celestial Arcanum sect and the Villa Master of the White Cloud Villa would be nothing to him. The first rays of dawn shone behind him, making him look like a god standing proudly in the sky. When the crowd below witnessed this scene, their hearts were shaken. Everyone seemed to have been touched and knelt down one after another, as if they were worshipping Duanling. This was the feeling. This was the feeling of everyone worshipping you. the feeling of supremacy. Duan Ling opened his eyes slightly, filled with excitement. His laughter was so loud that it pierced through the sky. Atop the city wall, the Supreme Elder and Wu Mu closed their eyes. Their hearts were like dead ashes. All of a sudden, the Supreme Elder opened his eyes. His heart, which was almost drowned in darkness, seemed to project a glimmer of hope. There was still a spirit beast of unknown strength within the Imperial City. It was the plump dog that killed a supreme fire dragon with 2 paws. With it here, it should be able to stop the Shurasek's demons. The Supreme Elder's chest tightened, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. However, a glimmer of hope welled up in his heart. If even that supreme beast couldn't stop Duan Ling, then the southern region would once again fall under the Shurasek control. His laughter reverberated throughout the Imperial City and struck fear into everyone's hearts. All of a sudden, Duan Ling's laughter came to an abrupt halt. The Supreme Elder and Wu Mu's eyes widened as they looked in a certain direction within the Imperial City. This was because they felt a surge of spirit energy soaring into the sky from that direction. It seemed as if it was about to disperse the clouds in the sky. What's going on? What's that? A trace of excitement appeared on Ni Yan's exquisite face as she turned her head to look in the direction of the store. All she saw was a golden beam of light soaring into the sky from the store. That beam of golden light was extremely pure. Blackie, who was originally lying on the ground, suddenly raised its head and looked at the beam of light in astonishment. When the beam of light slowly dissipated, a peculiar wave of energy spread out from the kitchen. A fragrance that seemed to be able to make one sink into it, drifted over from time to time. With the store as the center, the fragrance spread out in all directions, slowly drifting through the entire Imperial City. That fragrance was indescribable, but it was enough to make one sink into it. One couldn't help but close one's eyes and breathe in, trying to catch a glimpse of that invisible fragrance. Almost every commoner within the Imperial City who was lying on the ground was attracted by this fragrance. They squinted their eyes and raised their heads in enjoyment. It smells so good. I've never smelled such a fragrant aroma before. What is being cooked? This fragrance is even better than the fragrance of a woman's body. It's over, I'm drunk. The commoners discussed spiritedly, all of them intoxicated. Ni Yin and the others were also immersed in this fragrance. That fragrance seemed to contain the smell of wine, but it also contained the smell of meat. However, the smell of meat was mixed with the smell of abalone. It was impossible to tell what exactly it was. That kind of feeling was as if someone was tickling one's heart. The itch was unbearable. The entire light wind Imperial City was enveloped by this fragrance. The atmosphere that Duan Ling had painstakingly created was instantly shattered by this fragrance. The people who were originally kneeling on the ground couldn't help but stand up. The Supreme Elder and Wu Mu wore an odd expression as they sniffed the fragrance in the air. They exclaimed inwardly, "It's really fragrant." Ji Qingxue, on the other hand, didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This random fragrance. Could it be that Honorbu was actually cooking a moment ago? 3 supreme beings were fighting, yet he didn't panic at all? He was actually cooking? You're really awesome. Honorbu. The aroma caused Ji Qingxue's fear of Duan Ling to dissipate by quite a bit. His originally tense muscles also began to relax. Everyone smelled this fragrance, including Duan Ling. His eyes were like lightning as he looked into the store. The location of the 10,000 bestial flames was there, and the fragrance was also coming from there. That place was his target. Bufong carefully peeled off the leaf of the purple spirit fruit, which had been dyed gold. He only tore a small hole in it. Immediately, surging steam gushed out from the hole. It was accompanied by an aroma that caused Bufong to completely sink into it. That fragrance seemed to transform into a resplendent gold color. It was as if a dragon was flying out of it, or as if a toad was leaping out of it. The fragrance assaulted his mind like an arrow shooting into his heart. He squinted his eyes, and the corners of his mouth curled into a smile as he enjoyed the intoxicating fragrance. After a long time, he came back to his senses and exclaimed in his heart, as expected of the Buddha jumps over the wall soup. During the cooking process, there wasn't even the slightest bit of fragrance. However, as soon as he tore off the purple spirit fruit's leaf, the fragrance was unstoppable. It was as if he covered his nose, and the fragrance would seep into his limbs through his pores. After swallowing a mouthful of saliva, Bufong completely peeled off the purple spirit fruit's leaf. The fragrance surged out, overflowing with essence, energy, and spirit energy. The dish seemed to be glowing with all sorts of colors. It was extremely beautiful. However, the glow didn't last for long. Soon, it disappeared, leaving behind only the fragrance, spirit energy, essence energy, and surging steam. At this moment, Bufong didn't know that the fragrance of the Buddha jumps over the wall soup had already spread throughout the entire imperial city. He was in a good mood. He picked up the warm porcelain jar and walked out of the store. Gulp, gulp, the sound of people swallowing their saliva resounded throughout the imperial city. It was simply terrifying. Even Ji Qingxue, the emperor of the Light Wind Empire, had never seen such a scene. Snort! A muffled snort exploded in the sky. It was like a thunderclap, causing every commoner who was immersed in the fragrance to raise their heads in fright. At this moment, they finally came to their senses. As it turned out, there was a terrifying existence standing in the sky. Duan Ling used a cold snort to make his presence known. His gaze fell upon the store as he sniffed the air. He had to admit that this fragrance was really fragrant. However, he was still concerned about the 10,000 bestial flames. As he tapped the air with the tip of his foot, the air seemed to tremble and ripples spread out. Then, the sound of chains colliding resounded. Duan Ling's figure landed in front of the store with a swoosh, stirring up a violent gale. Ai Yin and the others were immediately frightened. They quickly retreated into the store. When faced with such an existence, they would only feel safe inside the store. Bufong carried the porcelain jar containing the Buddha jumps over the wall, soup out of the kitchen. He placed the jar on the table. The fragrance was endless, as if it would never end. He looked at Xiao Yinyu and curled up the corners of his mouth. The elixir cuisine, Buddha jumps over the wall soup, is done. General Xiao Meng's poison should be cured. When Xiao Yinyu heard this, she immediately burst into tears of joy. She quickly supported Xiao Meng, whose face was filled with a deathly aura. When Bufong walked out of the kitchen, Duan Ling finally saw him. Duan Ling would never forget Bufong's appearance for the rest of his life. It was the bastard who tore the 10,000 bestial flames bit by bit and swallowed it right under his nose. Holding the Shura Sek sword, Duan Ling's entire body emitted a murderous aura as he charged toward Bufong. Bufong seemed to have sensed something. He raised his head in puzzlement and looked toward the outside of the store. He saw Duan Ling, who was gazing at him with a murderous aura as he slowly walked toward him. Huh, wasn't this guy the one who was slightly weaker than him when he was fighting for the 10,000 bestial flames in the 100,000 mountains? Why was he here? Moreover, this guy seemed to be very strong. Even Xiao Bai couldn't defeat him. Bufong thought in astonishment. He wiped off the water on his hand and expressionlessly looked at Duan Ling. Duan Ling also stared at Bufong. He opened his mouth and said in an eerie voice, "Brat, I finally found you. Hand over the 10,000 bestial flames, or else die." Chapter 368. Or else die. After Duan Ling uttered these words, the murderous intent emanating from his body almost materialized. It was as if a frightening demon was forming behind him, ready to devour everything. At this moment, everyone felt their hearts sink. They took a few steps back, their faces pale. Waves of air billowed out, and a suppressive aura enveloped the area. The surrounding people felt a stifling sensation in their chests, as if a giant rock was pressing down on them. Bufong's expression didn't change much. In other words, The expression on his face didn't change at all. "You want the 10,000 bestial flames?" Bufang asked calmly. His voice wasn't loud and was calm. However, the surrounding area was suppressed by Duan Ling's suppressive aura. As soon as his words left his mouth, they immediately reverberated around the area. Duan Ling walked slowly. The friction between his feet and the gravel on the ground caused goosebumps to rise on the skin of the onlookers. "You can't keep the 10,000 bestial flames. This kind of treasure is not something you can possess. Hand it over, and you'll live. If you don't, you'll die." Duan Ling's tone was as menacing as ever. If Bufang hadn't snatched the 10,000 bestial flames away, he would have already broken through the Supreme Being's shackles and stepped into the divine state with the help of the 10,000 bestial flames. He wouldn't have needed to fight for it with such fanfare. "Is this the fire you want?" Bufang asked calmly. Then he slightly opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of golden flames. The flames darted out and hovered above his palm. Huh, Honorbu could actually spit fire? Everyone in the store looked at Bufang with shock and curiosity. When did Honorbu learn such a special technique? Looking at the golden flames quietly burning in Honorbu's palm, their eyes gradually filled with astonishment. That flame seemed to be very extraordinary. The moment Duan Ling saw the flames, his aura erupted once again. His pupil shrank as he stared longingly at the 10,000 bestial flames. That's right. This was the 10,000 bestial flames, the 10,000 bestial flames he yearned for. Wait, the aura of the 10,000 bestial flames was a little strange. Had it been refined? How could this be? How could a mere 7th grade ant refine the 10,000 bestial flames? Duan Ling's pupil shrank as his aura fluctuated unsteadily. Staring at the 10,000 bestial flames, the expression on his face kept changing. There was surprise, confusion, anger. Bang! Bufang clenched his fists, scattering the 10,000 bestial flames. He then said lazily, "This flame is already fused with me, so I can't give it to you. Get lost." After finishing his sentence, Bufang no longer paid any attention to Duan Ling, who had almost sunk into madness. Instead, she turned around and walked to the Buddha jumps over the wall soup. The Buddha jumps over the wall soup was still emitting dense steam and fragrance. That intoxicating and indescribable fragrance stirred everyone's heart. Bufang took a blue and white porcelain bowl. He gently scooped out a spoonful of steaming golden soup from the porcelain jar. The soup was quite thick, and it was filled with surging spiritual energy. "Feed this to General Xiaoming. This is the elixir cuisine, the Buddha jumps over the wall soup. It should be able to neutralize the poison in his body." After Bufang scooped out a spoonful of soup, he passed the porcelain bowl to Xiao Yinyu. Xiao Yinyu did not react for a moment. She was stunned for a moment before she hurriedly took the porcelain bowl from Bufang's hands. Honorbu was as calm as ever. The guy outside the door was about to go berserk, yet he still had the mood to scoop out a spoonful of soup. Duan Ling's aura was suppressed. He raised the Shurasek sword and pointed its tip at Bufang. Then, the tip of his feet touched the ground, and his figure shot toward the store as if he was sucking out the air. Buzz, a figure dashed out from the kitchen. It blocked the entrance of the store and blocked Duan Ling's dashing figure. Duan Ling's figure spun in midair and steadied himself. His gaze swept across the area and landed on the figure that blocked him. Xiao Bai's eyes turned ash-white once again. The metal wings that had been retracted suddenly unfurled as he floated in midair, facing off against Duan Ling. Looking at this chubby lump of metal, Duan Ling seemed to have recalled some bad memories. His heart became even more depressed. "It's you. You ate the departed soul, orb of my Shura sect. Damn it. Spit it out." Duan Ling bellowed in rage. The shackles on his body clanked. He swung his sword, almost cutting through the air. The metal wings on Xiao Bai's back flapped and gathered in front of him. It transformed into a shield, trying to block the sword. Boom! The sword slammed down, and Xiao Bai was directly cut down from the sky. He crashed into the ground, causing the ground to tremble violently. The power of the Shurasek sword was terrifying. Duan Ling's blood and energy were roaring. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. When the departed soul orb was half refined by the 10,000 bestial flames, the spiritual essence within had transformed into spiritual energy that helped him break through half of the Supreme Being's shackles. However, the remaining half of the departed soul orb was swallowed by this lump of metal. He remembered very clearly that when he saw that scene, his lungs almost exploded with rage. The departed soul orb, a dignified, semi-divine tool, was tossed out by a 7th grade ant like it was a piece of trash. In the end, it was swallowed by this puppet. He would never forget that scene until now. Boom! The rubble on the ground flew everywhere. Xiao dashed out unscathed. With a flap of his wings, he transformed into thousands of flying daggers that slashed at Duan Ling. Duan Ling's murderous intent was overflowing. With a twist of the Shurasek sword energy soared into the air and cut down the flying daggers. Xiao Bai's body seemed to be propelled by a huge force as he charged at Duan Ling. He threw a punch, which was blocked by Duan Ling's Shurasek sword. Boom! 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 Xiao Bai's punches were extremely fast. It was as if he was completely suppressing Duan Ling. Sounds of collisions rang out continuously in the air. Sparks flew everywhere. Bang! Duan Ling's legs swept out, smashing Xiao Bai's body onto the ground. He raised the Shurasek's sword horizontally and soared into the sky. A huge shadow of the Shurasek's sword instantly appeared in the sky. That shadow of the sword directly slashed down, slashing at the spot where Xiao Bai had fallen. Boom! A deep ravine was carved out on the ground. The citizens of the imperial city instantly felt their hearts skip a beat. Some people were so frightened by this godlike method that they started crying. Whoosh! Rubble flew everywhere. Xiao Bai's figure once again shot out from the rubble. His body was in a sorry state, covered with sword marks. There was also a faint green smoke rising from his body. After all, Duan Ling was half a step into the divine realm. He was an existence that could crush any supreme being. Although Xiao Bai had swallowed the departed soul orb and evolved, he was still not Duan Ling's opponent. After touching the divine realm, the difference in strength was like heaven and earth. While Xiao Yinyu was carefully feeding Xiao Bai the soup of the Buddha jumps over the wall soup, Bufang had also walked to the store's entrance. He frowned as he looked at Xiao Bai, who was being beaten up in the air. Rumble! Xiao Bai was once again beaten down from the sky by Duan Ling, smashing hard onto the ground. Duan Ling's battle prowess had completely surpassed the level of a supreme being. Although Xiao Bai couldn't beat Duan Ling couldn't do anything to Xiao Bai either. This fellow was extremely resistant to beatings. No one knew what material he was made of. He was like a cockroach that couldn't die. Every time he was smashed onto the ground, he would explosively shoot up again. Duan Ling became a little irritated from the beating. A cold glint flashed in his eyes. Duan Ling's mind flickered. Instantly, the blood-colored true energy transformed into surging sword energy. The sword energy surged violently and actually formed a sword energy cage. That cage fiercely suppressed Xiao Bai. Xiao Bai's gray eyes flickered. He spread his metal wings, trying to break free from this metal cage. Duan Ling wouldn't let this annoying fellow break free so easily. The Shurasek sword in his hand flew out, piercing through the sky and hovering above the cage, suppressing Xiao Bai. With the Shurasek sword guarding him, no matter how much strength Xiao Bai exerted, he couldn't break free from the sword energy cage. Finally, Xiao Bai was trapped. Duan Ling's gaze once again landed on Bufang. Duan Ling's eyes were once again filled with madness. With your 7th grade cultivation, how can you refine the 10,000 bestial flames? So what if you refine it? I will still pluck the 10,000 bestial flames out of you. Duan Ling roared. A wave of air ripples instantly exploded in the sky. Then, Duan Ling's figure rapidly shot down from the sky. His target was Bufang, who was standing in front of the store. Like a cannonball, Duan Ling rapidly shot down. It was as if the air couldn't withstand his speed, producing bursts of sonic booms. In the distance, the supreme elder and Wu Mu's pupils shrank. Their hearts tightened. Bu Fong stood with his hands clasped behind his back. Duan Ling's rapid approach had raised a strong gust of wind that broke the velvet rope that tied his hair. His jet-black hair fluttered in the wind. However, Bu Fong's face didn't show the slightest hint of emotion. He was still as calm as before. However, the way he looked at Duan Ling had an extra hint of seriousness. The murderous intent in Duan Ling's eyes intensified. The expression on his face also became crazier. For the 10,000 bestial flames, for the opportunity to break the Supreme Being's shackles. He would rather go crazy. Die! Duan Ling roared. Who gave you the courage to bark in front of the Lord Go? Suddenly, a gentle and magnetic male voice rang out. Then, in front of Duan Ling's eyes, a dog's paw suddenly condensed in front of him. Dog's paw? What the hell? Duan Ling's mind trembled. With a strange expression on his face, he planned to casually slap the dog's paw away. However, in the next moment, his expression changed drastically. He couldn't slap the dog's paw away. As the dog's paw swept past him, it was as if nothing could stop it. With a single slap, he was sent flying. Like a cannonball, Duan Ling was sent flying by the paw. Swoosh! Like an arrow being shot back, Duan Ling left a trail of dust in the imperial city and crashed into the city wall. The city wall was smashed into pieces by the impact. A violent rumble rang out. Yin was dumbfounded. Ouyang Xiaoi was also dumbfounded. All the citizens of the imperial city were completely dumbfounded. That insufferably arrogant warrior, who was like an invincible god of war, was suddenly slapped back like a rubber ball. What happened just now? Bu Fong stood at the entrance. He gently exhaled, and the corners of his mouth curled up. Blackie, well done. Blackie, who was lying lazily on the ground, licked its dainty paw and slowly stood up. It looked at Bu Fong and rolled its eyes. Chapter 369. Boom! He stamped his foot on the ground, causing the ground to tremble. His figure shot out and dashed toward Fong Fong's little store. This dog's bark was like the roar of an ancient dragon or the roar of a lion. It immediately stunned the aggressive Duan Ling. Bu Fong's gaze fell on the steaming and fragrant Buddha jumps over the wall soup. He couldn't help but lick his lips. The Buddha jumps over the wall soup wasn't just an elixir cuisine. It was also a rare delicacy. Her mind was still focused on the blood-colored talisman array in her hand. Her mental energy seeped out like strands of silk and permeated the talisman array that she had set up for a long time. He didn't manage to shatter the dog's paw. Duan Ling felt his face contorting. With a swoosh, he was sent flying once again. That shouldn't be the case. Previously, the expert in the store only succeeded because of the demonic god's disdain. This time, he would probably be crushed. Dense sword chi gathered in front of him, constantly converging into a very large blood-red greatsword. Never in his wildest dreams would he have imagined that the store was actually hiding such a powerful trump card. Was it a supreme beast? Moreover, it wasn't an ordinary supreme beast. Outside the store, Duan Ling, who was sent flying once again by Blackie, returned with a roar. After all, he was half a step into the divine realm. To him, an ordinary supreme being was no different from an ant. Duan Ling seemed to have been stunned by the dog's bark. The big hole slowly revealed the scenery of the city inside. That sword slashed down, creating a bottomless ravine on the ground. That kind of method was like that of a god. It left an unforgettable impression in the hearts of the imperial city citizens. His hair hung down and covered half of his face. Duan Ling's gaze became cold once again. He abruptly looked in the direction of the store and let out a long sigh. When they thought about the reason for the appearance of that large hole, their bodies couldn't help but tremble. It was as if a ball of fire was burning in Xiao Meng's chest. He couldn't help but howl in pain. Would he be sent flying again this time? This was a punch that wanted to completely obliterate the supreme beast. The city wall was shattered, and the ground was littered with rubble. As the rubble rattled, a figure crawled out from the rubble. At this moment, fortunately, after swaying for a while, the city wall stopped shaking and stabilized, causing Ji Qingxue, who had been on tenterhooks, to heave a long sigh of relief. Duan Ling's speed burst forth once again, becoming even more astonishing. This dog was playing tricks. The crisscrossing pitch-black poison on his face wriggled and slowly began to dissipate. Ji Qingyu had no confidence at all, so he really didn't want to face this supreme beast again. This sword was Duan Ling's sure-kill sword. Ji Qingyu's army was thrown into disarray by the impact. They must have encountered a fake demon god. The amount of true qi contained in the half-step divine realm was extremely terrifying. The energy contained in this huge blood-red sword was enough to make any supreme being tremble with fear. However, it was undeniable that a supreme beast that could send him flying was probably in existence at the pinnacle of supreme beasts. That dog's paw was actually able to send him flying, even though it was mostly due to his carelessness and disdain. This dog's paw was made up of spirit energy. It was extremely huge and sturdy. This King dog's paw again. Could that Azura's Gate sovereign really defeat that supreme dog? Bufang looked at Xiao Yinyu's disappointed expression and couldn't help but roll his eyes. Duan Ling couldn't help but want to roar. This dog was actually looking down on him? Outside the imperial city, Xiao Yinyu was taken aback. Duan Ling walked through the air. Every step he took caused the void to tremble. Then, he waved his hand and threw a punch. His fist was entwined with the chains of the supreme being's shackles. The citizens of the imperial city knelt down in fright. This frightening fellow, who was like a demon god, was back. Rumble. Ji Qingyu felt the city wall suddenly explode, and his heart trembled. In the eyes of the citizens of the imperial city, it was as if they had directly bumped into that dog's paw. Xiao Meng, who had drunk the Buddha jumps over the wall soup, didn't seem to have much of a change in his expression. As he soared into the sky, the gravel on the ground crumbled and turned into dust. Surging true energy gathered from his body and continuously condensed. Duan Ling stretched out his palm. However, this time, he learned his lesson and didn't rush to attack. Instead, he hovered in the air from afar and stared at the Lord Go with vigilance. Xiao Meng's eyes were bloodshot. However, Duan Ling was no fool. He might have been careless when he was sent flying the first time, but he was sent flying the second time as well. He definitely couldn't underestimate his enemy, even if it was just a dog. He flew backward at an even faster speed, leaving behind a trail of smoke and dust in the imperial capital. This time, the citizens of the imperial city were truly dumbfounded. Duan Ling felt as if 10,000 Ahuangs were galloping through his mind. He couldn't help but curse out loud. Just as Duan Ling's fist was about to land, his doggy mouth suddenly expanded and let out a deafening bark. In the distance, Xiao Bai punched the sword energy cage again and again, trying to break it and escape. However, each time, he was stopped by the sword released by the Shurasek sword at the top of the cage. With a whistling sound, the air exploded. Blackie leisurely retracted its paw. There was nothing that the Lord Go couldn't solve with one paw. If there was, then he would just have to give it a few more paws. A plump, pitch-black dog strutted its cat-like steps in front of the store. Its doggy eyes were looking at him with a faint smile. Why? He couldn't even deal with a dog. No one can stop me. Not even a supreme beast at the peak. Clatter. The sound of chains colliding resounded in his ears. Duan Ling roared and threw out a punch. Duan Ling roared. His eyes were filled with a blood-red glow, as if there were flames burning within. The impression that Duan Ling gave them was too terrifying. It was so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. He wasn't the only one. Even Ji Qingyu's army couldn't help but panic. In their eyes, the supposedly sturdy city wall had actually been blasted into a giant hole. Duan Ling's speed was fast and domineering. Xiao Yinyu carefully fed Xiao Meng a bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall soup. She wasn't the least bit affected by the battle outside. However, the glaring hole was right in front of them. They didn't dare to attack it. He couldn't help but recall the terrifying supreme beast in Fong Fong's little store. Ever since that supreme beast made its debut, it seemed as though it had never been defeated before. Boom. Swoosh. Was it ineffective? Why are you guys in such a hurry? He is too deeply poisoned. The toxins have spread to his internal organs. Do you think this Buddha jumps over the wall soup is an elixir? It will react if you eat it. In just a moment, he saw the culprit who had sent him flying. The city wall shook, which frightened Ji Qingxue and the others who were on top of it. Duanling's speed had reached its peak. It was so fast that it was almost impossible to follow him with the naked eye. He picked up a pair of chopsticks, intending to taste the Buddha jumps over the wall soup. This was great. It saved them the trouble of finding a way to break into the city. Therefore, even if the citizens hoped that the expert in the store would win, they weren't confident. Duanling rushed over, bringing with him an even stronger gust of wind. Black as cat-like steps also came to a halt. A strong gust of wind blew past, causing the fat on its body to flap noisily. When he regained his senses, he saw a giant dog paw enlarging in front of him. However, the dog's mouth slightly twitched. Bufang looked at Duanling, who was sent flying again. The corners of his mouth slightly twitched. He didn't pay any more attention to Duanling. He turned around and returned to the store, looking at Xiaoming, who had just drunk the Buddha jumps over the wall soup. Waves of sonic booms resounded. Duanling, who was half a step into the divine realm, could easily break through the sound barrier. However, while they were talking, Xiaoming, who hadn't changed much, suddenly opened his eyes. Boom, boom, boom. The high priestess was still sitting in the carriage. She didn't show her face, even though the rumbling noises were coming from outside. If he hadn't been blinded by that dog's bark, how could he have been sent flying again? Duanling stood up with a gloomy expression. The true energy on his body surged, blowing away the dust that had landed on him. Xiao Yinyu and Xiao Xiaolong couldn't help but feel a sense of loss. Even Owner Bu's elixir cuisine couldn't save their father. Could it be that their father had no choice but to die like this? What did this mean? What did this dog mean? The invincible demonic god in their hearts was sent flying again. That 1 second of sluggishness caused Duanling to be greatly alarmed, and a bad premonition enveloped him. The rage in Duanling's heart became more and more intense, as if it was about to burst out from his chest. Once he swung his sword, he would definitely cut down this arrogant fat dog. Bufang couldn't help but admire Duanling's actions. It was indeed effective. Chapter 370. Swoosh. Bufang held his bamboo chopsticks and deftly picked up a sparkling dragon claw from the porcelain jar containing the Buddha jumps over the wall soup. This was the claw of the supreme fire dragon, and it emitted a rich fragrance. The flesh on it was simmered until it was translucent like a crystal, and the dragon tendons within it were very obvious. Light golden broth dripped down from the tip of the dragon claw. When the broth broke apart, the fragrance and spirit energy that had been enshrouding it gushed out, intoxicating Bufang in an instant. This supreme dragon claw was translucent, and the dragon scales had already been scraped off by Bufang. Therefore, even though the dragon meat was a little black, it was still very tender. If one were to carefully sniff it, they would be able to smell the wine fragrance emitting from the dragon claw. That was because during the cooking process, Bufang used the ice heart jade urn wine as a supplementary ingredient in the soup. Originally, Bufang wanted to use the Frost Blaze Path Understanding brew, but the production of the Frost Blaze Path Understanding brew was limited. Therefore, he could only settle for the second best and chose the ice heart jade urn wine. Fortunately, the taste of the Buddha jumps over the wall soup was very good. The gazes of everyone in the store landed on the dragon claw in Bufang's hand. That dragon claw was actually not complete. It was only a small part of the supreme fire dragon's claw. After all, the dragon claw was so big that it couldn't be stuffed into the porcelain jar. Gulp. Ouyang Xiaoi swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Her big eyes were filled with curiosity as she looked at the dragon claw in Bufang's hand. She sucked in a breath of cold air. A dragon claw. That was a supreme beast ingredient. Was owner Bufang going to eat it just like that? Like eating a chicken claw? Couldn't he pay more attention to a supreme beast? Xiao Xiaolong was also curious about the taste of a supreme beast. He looked at the dragon claw in Bu Fang's hand enviously. Bu Fang was also somewhat impatient. He ignored the gazes of the surrounding people and bit down on the translucent dragon claw. Crack! It was very tender and crispy. The dragon's claw was bitten off by him directly. The dragon meat was very plump, completely different from chicken meat. It was tender and juicy. Once it entered his mouth, it was slightly hot, making Bu Fang let out a breath. The dragon claw was densely packed with dragon tendons, which were harder to cook. Compared to the tender dragon meat, it was much harder to chew. But the chewy taste was a strange enjoyment. Even though the dragon tendons were very strong, the taste was also very delicious. There was a unique fragrance, and this fragrance wasn't as fresh as that of the dragon meat, but it had a type of mellow feeling. Bu Fang's mouth was full of grease, and he was very happy. Being able to eat such delicacies naturally made him happy. This delicacy was a supreme beast ingredient, which was extremely rare. After all, the meat of a supreme beast was much better than that of a rank 8 earth dragon. Pu. Bu Fang gnawed on the dragon claw as he walked to the door. He leaned against the door frame and spat out 2 pieces of white dragon bone. He smacked his lips and watched the battle between Duan Ling and Blackie. Ni Yin and the others didn't know whether to laugh or cry when they saw Bu Fang's expression. Duan Ling naturally saw Bu Fang's expression. He saw that this kid was actually eating the delicacy while watching the battle. He didn't care about Duan Ling at all. When had he, Duan Ling, ever been looked down upon like this? Duan Ling was truly enraged. Regardless of whether it was the owner or the dog in front of the store, they all had to die. The blood-red giant sword soared through the sky, emitting a terrifying pressure. Blood-red sword energy scattered in all directions, bombarding the ground from time to time, creating many holes. Duan Ling's hair fluttered in the wind as his gaze locked onto Blackie. Walala, the supreme being chain on his left hand, let out a sound and drooped down. Duan Ling glared at Blackie, and his killing intent soared to the sky. Duan Ling roared, and as if he had used up all of his strength, he pushed the giant blood sword out with his palm. Rumble. The blood-red giant sword moved in the sky, and the friction between it and the air seemed to emit intense sounds. The Supreme Elders and Wu Mu's pupil shrank. The might of this sword was extremely terrifying. It made both of them, who were at the peak of the Supreme Being realm, feel a wave of despair. Goosebumps appeared on their skin. They didn't have the slightest bit of confidence that they could block this move. This was the power of a half-step divine realm expert. In the southern region, the terrifying attack of a half-step divine realm expert was unstoppable. However, Duan Ling wasn't facing a human. The Supreme Elder had always pinned his hopes on Blackie. He stood up, pressed his hands tightly against the city wall, and fixed his gaze on Blackie. All of a sudden, his pupils shrank, and his whole body started to tremble. It was as if he had seen something inconceivable. It wasn't just him. Ji Qingxue, Wu Mu, and all of the soldiers on the city wall were also dumbfounded. They stared into the distance as if they were looking at a monster. Among Ji Qingyu's troops, the long eyelashes of the high priestess, who had been sitting cross-legged in the carriage and drawing a talisman array, suddenly opened her eyes. Her heart palpitated. Her gaze seemed to penetrate the carriage's curtain, and she saw an inconceivable scene. Blackie lazily raised its doggy head and looked at the giant sword that was slowly slashing toward it. The giant sword was truly enormous. As it slashed down, it seemed as if even the store behind it was affected. Violent waves of wind and pressure were emitted from the giant sword. It seemed as if it wanted to make everyone kneel on the ground in the face of this sword's might. Perhaps the sword's pressure was very strong. However, for Blackie and everyone else in the store, the sword's pressure couldn't affect them at all. At most, it only brought about a slightly stronger gust of wind. Crunch, crunch. Bu Fang gnawed on his blanket and looked at the exquisite blood-red giant sword with great interest. He couldn't help but exclaim in his heart. This blood-red giant sword was formed by the condensation of sword energy. Sword energy was actually just a different form of true energy. In other words, this giant sword that covered the sky was formed by the condensation of true energy. How much true energy would that require? Even a supreme being's true energy wouldn't have this much, right? For the first time, Black's eyes became serious. From this sword, it could feel the pressure of heaven and earth. It was the pressure of heaven and earth that only divine realm experts could control. Pressure of heaven and earth? Too bad you're only half a step into the divine realm. You've only mastered a half-baked pressure of heaven and earth. It's useless. Blackham muttered to himself. Then he slammed his doggy paw on the ground. Boom! A terrifying pressure suddenly burst out from his body. This pressure seemed as if it was about to soar into the sky. It forcefully suppressed the pressure of heaven and earth that Duan Ling had imbued into the blood-red giant sword. For the first time, Duan Ling's expression changed drastically. This dog can also control the pressure of heaven and earth. Duan Ling's heart shrank. He felt as if his entire body had been struck by a morning bell. However, what happened next caused him to feel even more terrified, because in his eyes, the chubby, lazy dog suddenly swelled up. Its body became much larger, and it opened its doggy mouth toward the giant sword. The giant sword slashed down. Fierce winds howled, and the howling wind surged toward the open doggy mouth. The blood-red giant sword, Duan Ling's sure-kill attack against Blackie, finally slashed down. However, reality did not play out as Duan Ling had expected. Blackie did not kill the fat dog. Instead, the Shurasek sword was slowly swallowed by the giant doggy mouth. The stomach of the slender black dog was like a bottomless pit. Duan Ling's sure-kill attack, which was so huge, was actually slowly swallowed. The visual impact it brought to everyone was huge. Many of the Imperial City's citizens were paralyzed on the ground. They were completely dumbfounded. Their faces were dull and lifeless. Terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. It could even eat a giant sword that was completely formed by sword energy. What else could this dog not eat? After completely swallowing the terrifying giant sword, Blacka burped and stuck out its tongue to lick its mouth. Its eyes, which had become much fiercer than before, looked at Duan Ling Bang. In the next moment, after a loud explosion, Black's slender and hideous figure disappeared from where it stood. It suddenly appeared in front of Duan Ling. He slapped Duan Ling's head with his palm. With a loud swoosh, Duan Ling's whole body was smashed into the ground, causing the entire Imperial City to shake violently. Blacka was indeed awesome. Bufong gnawed on the dragon claw, getting more and more excited. His mouth was greasy, and his spirit energy was overflowing. Boom! With another loud bang, Blackie suddenly landed on the ground. Duan Ling's body was flung out like a cannonball. At this moment, his whole body was numb, and his eyes had lost their luster. His half-step divine realm body was covered in fine cracks. It was as if he would be smashed into pieces by the doggy's paw in the next moment. I heard that you want to kill your Lord Go with a sword. Blackie slapped Duan Ling, who was flung away, back into the ground, and spoke in human language. After speaking, Black's figure disappeared again. In the next moment, Duan Ling was flung out again. He coughed up blood, and his body cracked. You haven't even reached the divine physique echelon, yet you dare to act tough in front of the Lord Go. Bang! Duan Ling once again fell to the ground like a cannonball. Poochie! Duan Ling, who was flung out again by the Lord Go, spat out a mouthful of blood in the air. His face was pale, and blood splattered across the sky. Was there no end to it? He had lost all hope. At this moment, he was sure that this dog was not a supreme being beast. It was a real, divine beast. With his half-step divine realm strength, facing a real divine beast, it was no wonder he was tortured. He was furious. If he could break free from the supreme being's shackles and step into the divine realm, how could he be tortured by a dog? He was full of resentment. It was all because of that bastard who ate the 10,000 bestial flames. Duan Ling's body was immobilized. His eyes were filled with hatred as he looked in the direction of Bu Fong. Crunch, crunch. Bu Fong spat out a few pieces of dragon bones and calmly looked back at his opponent's resentful gaze. Pucci. Duan Ling was even more enraged and spat out another mouthful of blood. Boring. The Lord Go glanced at Duan Ling, who couldn't even resist. He curled his doggy lips and raised his doggy paw. The pressure of heaven and earth suddenly pressed down on Duan Ling's body. The phantom of a doggy paw suddenly appeared and slapped down on Duan Ling. The Lord Go intended to finish off this funny human once and for all. However, this paw was only waved halfway when Lord Dog suddenly let out a soft cry of surprise and looked outside the imperial capital. Boom! From there, a graceful figure stepped on the air. Her crystal-clear feet caused ripples in the air. A blood-colored jade talisman was flung out from her delicate hand. With a whistling sound, it instantly burrowed into Duan Ling's body, which was about to be smashed by the Lord Go's paw. Chapter 371. Swoosh. A blood-colored jade talisman drilled into Duan Ling's body and instantly entered his body, disappearing without a trace. The eyes of the high priestess, who was hovering in midair, suddenly widened. Then, 3 blood-colored talismans floated in her slender hands. She had been preparing these talismans for a long time, and they were filled with her essence, energy, and spirit. He abruptly crushed the 3 jade talismans in his hand, and a berserk shockwave instantly surged forth. The moment she crushed the talismans, the high priestess, Sai, seemed to reverberate in the air. The high priestess looked at Duan Ling with a complicated gaze. She was the array supreme being, proficient in arrays and the art of divination. Her understanding of arrays was no less than that of the celestial arcanum sex great elder. Moreover, the art of divination she had mastered was of a higher level than the inheritances of the southern region. When the heaven and earth obsidian flame was swallowed by Bu Fong, the high priestess discovered that Duan Ling's luck had changed. Moreover, he was destined to face a great calamity. If he couldn't escape, he would be turned into ashes. Therefore, ever since she left the 100,000 Mountains, she had been making arrangements. She had poured her blood, sweat, and tears in order to help Duan Ling survive this calamity. Today, her predictions had indeed been verified. The light-wind imperial city, which they had never paid any attention to, was actually hiding such a terrifying existence. Duan Ling, who was half a step into the divine realm, was no match for that spirit beast. Looking at Duan Ling's body, which was about to be smashed into pieces by the dog's paw, the high priestess' long eyelashes trembled. She made a hand seal and activated the blood-colored magic array floating in front of her. Outside the imperial city, the moment the magic array of Ji Qingyu's army was activated, everyone's heart trembled. Ji Qingyu felt a wave of dizziness. Everything in front of him became blurry in an instant. What was going on? Ji Qingyu was shocked. He resisted the dizziness in his head and turned around to look at his surroundings. He saw his soldiers lying limply on the ground, their breaths weak. Streaks of blood-colored light and distorted shadows were extracted from the bodies of the soldiers. They all floated toward the graceful figure in the sky. This demoness, Ji Qingyu, was filled with hatred. Looking at the fallen soldiers, his heart was bleeding. These were his soldiers, his hope. He glared at the great shaman in the void, his eyes filled with hatred. Ji Qingyu finally understood why the high priestess had ordered them to attack the city. It was all a trap. Whether they came to attack the city or not did not make much of a difference. The high priest was only doing this for this moment, to extract the soul essence of his tens of thousands of soldiers. Ji Qingyu's cultivation was at the 7th grade. Even though he was affected by the formation, there was a resistance within his body that resisted the suction force of the formation. So he just felt dizzy. But most of the soldiers didn't have his cultivation. Blood-colored light soared into the sky and instantly converged on a magic array in front of the high priest. The Grand Elder's eyes narrowed as he stared at the spiritual essences that filled the sky. He could not help but sigh in his heart as he looked at the Grand Priest with an even colder gaze. What a cruel formation this was. Only the demons of the Shura sect would do such a cruel thing. This was basically the same as sacrificing Ji Qingyu's army just to form a magic array. Lord Dog coldly glanced at the High Priestess. Then its paw, which had stopped moving, continued to slap down. To the Lord Go, no matter what you did, he would slap you to death with his paw. Boom! The tyrannical oppressive force almost caused Duan Ling's body to shatter. Cracks covered his body, and he continued to bleed in the void. Suddenly, Duan Ling's eyes opened. A blood-colored magic array flashed between his brows. Then, he turned his head in the direction of the High Priestess in shock. Duan Ling's eyes widened. His heart seemed to have tightened at this moment. In his eyes, he, who was supposed to be under the terrifying paw, suddenly switched places with the High Priestess. Aya! Duan Ling felt as if something was blocking his throat. He let out a hoarse cry. The High Priestess floated below Black's paw. The blood-colored jade talisman she shot into Duan Ling's body was a lesser teleportation talisman, a talisman that could switch places with the opponent. Originally, the High Priestess wanted to send the talisman into Black's body. However, after seeing the dog's body, the High Priestess' heart shuddered. She didn't have the courage to use the talisman. Therefore, she chose to switch places with Duan Ling. Even Duan Ling, who was half a step into the divine realm, couldn't resist Black's paw, let alone the High Priestess, whose body was even more fragile. Crack! The High Priestess's mask, which had been covering her face, suddenly shattered, revealing a delicate but pale face. It wasn't beautiful, but rather desolate. She looked at Duan Ling, who was surrounded by the blood-colored light, with a hint of reluctance and relief in her eyes. Bang! Under the paw, she was reduced to ashes. The Shura sect High Priestess was dead. The terrifying fluctuations gradually dissipated. Blackie stared at the woman who was reduced to ashes by his paw. He stared blankly at the empty spot. Clang! A piece of broken metal mask fell to the ground, making a crisp sound. The Imperial City was silent. Everyone held their breaths as they watched the scene unfold. Their hearts and minds were shaken. They were shocked that the High Priestess had sacrificed herself to block a sure-kill attack for the demon god. This was a huge blow to their minds. Bufong was also silent as he watched the scene unfold. He stuffed the last part of the dragon claw into his mouth. Duan Ling stared blankly at the empty space. Then, he finally lost his mind and let out a long howl toward the sky. His howl was filled with sorrow and sorrow. The High Priestess Aya was the woman who had always followed him. From the hidden dragon continent to the southern region, she followed him no matter when he was in glory or in dire straits. Now she was dead. Clatter! The chains on Duan Ling's arms suddenly clanked against each other. The magic array drawn by the High Priestess began to revolve. Streams of blood-colored spirit essences entered Duan Ling's body and flowed into the magic array between his eyebrows. Duan Ling's energy was rising steadily. Crack! Crack! He kept coughing out blood. His eyes turned red, and tears of blood rolled down his cheeks. His energy fluctuated. Duan Ling, wrapped in resentment and murderous intent, began to break through under the magic array created by the High Priestess. After absorbing the spirit essences of tens of thousands of soldiers, he began to break through. That damned demonic woman! Outside the Imperial City, an angry roar reverberated. Ji Qingyu spat out a mist of blood. His entire body swayed and fell to the ground. A giant trap had killed tens of thousands of his soldiers. He felt heartache and regret, but it was too late. Buzz, the Shura sect sword that had been trapping Xiao, shuddered. In the next moment, it shot out and dashed toward Duan Ling's location. Xiao Bai's gray eyes suddenly flashed. Seizing this opportunity, he smashed the sword energy cage with a punch. The scattered sword energy dispersed. The metal wings on Xiao Bai's back suddenly spread open. His cold gray eyes stared straight at Duan Ling in the distance. Blackie, on the other hand, was walking like a cat in the air with interest. The corners of its mouth curled up, revealing a hint of playfulness. Breaking the first shackle and stepping into the divine physique echelon, she does have some courage. No, I should say that the woman has some courage. Blackus snorted. The Shurasek sword scuttled into Duan Ling's hand. He gripped it tightly. His blood-red eyes were filled with sword energy. Duan Ling's face was full of malevolence. He coldly stared at Blackie and then at Bufong in the store, overflowing with murderous intent. Another long howl of grief and indignation. Duan Ling swung the shackle in his hand and slashed down with the Shurasek sword. Boom! The shackle trembled and made a clanking sound. The Shurasek sword slashed down on it, causing a wave of ripples to spread out. However, after absorbing the soul essences of tens of thousands of soldiers, Duan Ling's cultivation level had skyrocketed. When the sword slashed down, the shackle actually made a cracking sound. Numerous fine cracks densely covered the shackle. Finally, the Supreme Being's shackle was broken. Duan Ling held the Shurasek sword horizontally. His aura suddenly surged like a flood that had opened the floodgates. It surged and roared continuously. On top of the city wall, the Supreme Elder seemed to have aged a lot in an instant. His whole body went limp on the ground. His face was ashen. It's over. He succeeded in breaking through. The first stage of the 10th grade divine realm was the divine physique echelon. Even a divine physique echelon who had only broken one shackle was still a divine realm existence. Wu Mu also sucked in a breath of cold air. When he sensed the terrifying sword intent on Duan Ling's body, a trace of despair and timidity emerged in his heart. As a swordsman, he actually felt timidity. This showed how terrifying Duan Ling's aura was at this moment. Tens of thousands of soul essences were absorbed into his body, causing his aura to reach an extremely terrifying level. He had finally completed his breakthrough. Duan Ling took a deep breath, and his ice-cold gaze landed on Blackie, who was floating in the air. Blackie raised its head and snorted. Duan Ling raised the Shurasek sword and pointed it at Blackie. Chapter 372. Duan Ling's heart was filled with bewilderment and despair. The Lord Go exclaimed in surprise. He realized that Duan Ling was only slapped away and did not turn into ashes like the woman before. Black's body had already become slender. It suddenly opened its mouth and let out a deafening bark that resembled the roar of a dragon. The black dog raised its paw, snorted, and swatted at Black's head. The city wall shook as if there was an earthquake. A long crack appeared on the ground. Blackie couldn't remember, so was too lazy to continue thinking. Black's figure flashed and appeared at the spot where Duan Ling fell. All the floating dust was suddenly pressed back into the ground by a wave of pressure. Back then, he was in despair. He felt that the whole world had become gray and hopeless. As the dog's paw swatted down, everything collapsed. The divine physique echelon. Someone in the southern region had broken through to the divine physique echelon. A pitch-black metal pagoda fell out of the rubble. It bounced a few times on the ground and landed beside Black's dogleg. The violent explosion reverberated in the hearts of every Imperial City citizen. It was like a nightmare that haunted their minds. Like a cannonball, it shot out and smashed into the ground. A monstrous sword shadow appeared behind Duan Ling. This sword was filled with endless power. The sword energy that filled the sky almost suffocated everyone. A pair of metal wings suddenly spread open. The small pagoda soared into the sky and floated in the air. It swayed for a while and seemed to emit an unwilling roar. Then, it turned into a stream of light and disappeared in an instant. Bang, bang, bang. Blackie waved its paw and casually swatted the Shurasek sword, sending it flying backward. Duan Ling lay on his back in the rubble. His face was lifeless. The violent scarlet color in his eyes had already faded like a flood. This sword was infused with the essence, energy, and spirit of his breakthrough to the divine physique echelon. This sword was his strongest attack. He wanted to use this sword to kill this dog. All right. It's over. Everyone, go back to what you were supposed to do. Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes flickered as it crawled out of the rubble. Although it was sent flying by a punch, it was still intact. Duan Ling's body trembled as his eyes turned scarlet red. He roared and forcefully slashed down once again. Xiao Bai was no match for Duan Ling, who had stepped into the divine body realm. With a long howl, the Shurasect sword suddenly swung. An incomparably powerful sword energy wreaked havoc, causing the flying knives that Xiao Bai had slashed out to fly back. Duan Ling's blood-red eyes froze, and his body froze in the air. After a moment of silence, Duan Ling's ears were filled with the sounds of continuous explosions. Pu. Just when everyone thought that there would be an earth-shattering collision, the truth often shocked everyone. What kind of dog was this? Recalling the high priestess' final gaze, Duan Ling felt a sharp pain in his heart. However, the high priest risked his life to activate the small shifting talisman and took the black dog's fatal blow for him. The dog's paw and the Shurasect sword collided. Waves of sword energy whizzed out from his body. The Shurasect sword suddenly spun. Duan Ling grabbed it and threw it at Blackie. Everything around him seemed to have become silent, and he couldn't hear a single sound in his ears. Bufang spat out the last piece of dragon bone he was chewing. The entire dragon paw was eaten by him just like that. His mouth was filled with grease, and the fragrance lingered in his mouth for a long time. It was unforgettable. Blackie suddenly felt a little puzzled. Looking at the small tower, it felt a little familiar. Suddenly, Blackie's gentle voice resounded in the air. Although it was gentle, it was full of disdain. The distorted face was absorbed by the small tower. The small tower, which had been quiet all this time, suddenly began to tremble. However, he didn't care at all. Since one paw couldn't solve the problem, then two paws, this was not an evenly matched collision. Even if he had stepped into the divine body realm, he was still abused by this dog. He clenched his fist and smashed it hard on Xiao Bai's chubby belly. Xiao Bai's figure stood in front of Blackie. His gray eyes slightly fluctuated. Then, thousands of flying knives swept toward Duan Ling. Duan Ling took a step forward and appeared in front of Xiao Bai. Boom! Buzz Duan Ling was the epitome of destruction and reconstruction. His whole body was like a kite with a broken string. He was thrown to the ground in the distance, stirring up a cloud of dust. Why? Why was it that even after stepping into the divine body realm and becoming a 10th grade divine existence, he still couldn't defeat this dog? It suddenly shot up, giving Blackie a fright. Its figure was knocked back 2 steps by the small pagoda. The Shurasect sword was shattered. The majestic true energy he had gathered was scattered. The pressure of heaven and earth was also blasted apart. His heart was full of dissatisfaction, but he also felt a wave of helplessness. He must slaughter this dog today. Otherwise, he would be sorry to the high priestess who had died. Previously, he was only half a step into the divine body realm. Facing Blackie, he didn't have the slightest ability to resist. His body was almost destroyed by this powerful dog. The Shurasect sword's shadow was shattered. Blackie's doggy eyes stared at the disappearing small tower. He stuck out his tongue and licked his lips. His heart was filled with doubt. He actually lost again? Buzz, the densely packed, flying daggers, almost covered the sky and covered the sun. The surroundings were quiet. Bufang felt a little strange. He raised his eyebrows, scanned the area, and said calmly. His aura was incomparably strong. Swish! His pupils moved slightly, and he saw the black dog that had walked to his side. The high priestess was dead, and he had finally broken through and reconstructed, breaking into the divine body realm. Even Bufang's face became serious. Although he was confident in Blackie, this Duan Ling had already surpassed the Supreme Being realm. Could Blackie really defeat him? Kid, remember the sweet and sour Supreme Dragon ribs you owe the Lord Go? He swore that he had seen this small tower somewhere before. As for where exactly, he couldn't remember. After he finished speaking, the imperial city which was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop, suddenly became like boiling water. It was on the verge of collapse. Boom! This was an extremely simple and unadorned small tower. There was not the slightest fluctuation of energy. It was like an ornament. Instead, it was a merciless slaughter. The Shurasect sword let out a buzzing sound. Swish! Sweeping his eyes across the ruins, Blacka proudly raised his doggy head. He snorted and strutted back to the front of the store. He found a comfortable spot and lay down. However, Duan Ling's expression didn't change. With a wave of his hand, the Shurasect sword flew back to his hand. He fiercely slashed at Blackie. Duan Ling's figure burst out once again. This time, he carried the surging pressure of heaven and earth, crushing toward Blackie. After speaking, he turned around and went back into the store. The Supreme Elder of the Celestial Arcanum sect looked hopelessly at Duan Ling, whose aura was incomparably vigorous. He suddenly felt a wave of depression in his chest and spat out a mouthful of blood. Looking at this sword, everyone's expression changed drastically, and they felt extremely horrified. After all, he is in the divine physique echelon. His physical body is a level stronger than that of a supreme being. Who gave you the courage to attack the Lord Go again? However, Duan Ling was not afraid at all. Die! In Duan Ling's eyes, the sure-kill sword he used with his divine physique echelon cultivation was as fragile as tofu under the dog's paw. It couldn't even shake that terrifying dog paw. Raising his dainty doggy paw, Blackie still didn't hold back this time. It didn't die. The Lord Ghost slowly walked toward Duan Ling with his enchanting cat-like steps. A bloody light flashed. The Shurasect sword slashed down. Bang! Ignoring the annoying puppet, Duan Ling's murderous intent locked onto Blackie. He was like a ball being trampled by this dog. As he walked, his figure gradually reverted to that of a fat dog. Blacka looked at Bufong and solemnly reminded him before falling into a deep sleep. Clang! The Shurasect sword seemed to come to life in his hand. At this moment, Duan Ling felt unprecedentedly powerful. The aftermath of the breakthrough was still there, causing the true energy in his body to boil. It was as if his energy center was on the verge of overturning. All of a sudden, the small tower trembled. From the ruins, a spiritual essence floated out. The spiritual essence's face was filled with malevolence and unwillingness. It was the face of the Shurasect overlord. The Lord Ghost smacked his lips and lamented. The moment he tossed out the Shurasect sword, Duan Ling's entire body shot out. Duan Ling's gaze fell on the black dog in the distance. The inflated strength made his heart swell up. Rumble. The blood and energy in Duan Ling's body seemed to surge. Every breath he took sounded like thunder. Chapter 373. Some of them were wild with joy, dancing on the spot. When his father was still in power, being able to see an 8th-grade war god was already an incredible thing. Now that he had succeeded the throne, he had become even more powerful. Xiao Yinyu cried tears of joy. Well, these people were probably attracted by the Buddha jumps over the wall soup. Xiao Xiaolong waved his fist excitedly, looking at Bufong with admiration. The remaining half of the army was in a weakened state. Some of them cried tears of joy, kneeling on the ground with tears streaming down their faces. They respectfully bowed in Blacka's direction. How could there be such a refreshing and domineering dog in this world? When they looked into the distance, they saw Bufong scooping out ingredients from the jar of the Buddha jumps over the wall soup. Fragrant and spiritual energy permeated the air. As the emperor of an empire, he actually took the lead and stood in the most dangerous area of the imperial city. This kind of courage was enough to make them give their all. When all the toxins on his body had been cleansed, Duan Ling, who was in the 10th grade divine physique echelon, had an almost invincible body. However, in that deep pit, Duan Ling's body was directly smashed into pieces, sticking to the bottom of the pit like a pile of mud. The moment they entered the store, their gazes suddenly flickered with astonishment. This made them feel a little stifled. All in all, This uproar of a rebellion was finally resolved. The ingredients emitted warm steam, which was incomparably dense and extremely eye-catching. Only the imperial palace was not affected, which made Ji Qingxue feel a little better. This dish was simply like a miraculous elixir. Moreover, just as Ownerbu had said, because they were friends, 10,000 crystals for a bowl was really cheap. After Ji Qingxue finished dealing with some trivial matters, he rubbed his tired head, walked down the city wall, and quickly walked toward Fong Fong's little store. The scene inside the deep pit was really too shocking. It was indeed worthy of the name of the Black-Hearted Store. Those ingredients were full of spirit energy, and the fragrance they emitted incessantly made everyone's mouth water. Bufong seemed to feel the surrounding gazes, and he glanced around. The rich fragrance that pervaded the store simply caused their eyes to light up. However, there was no doubt that because of the existence of this dog, the disaster that was originally threatening the Light Wind Empire's existence was stopped just like that. His rise was due to the Shura Gate, and his downfall was also due to the Shura Gate. The porcelain jar containing the Buddha jumps over the wall soup was quite big, and it could probably hold more than 20 bowls. A bowl of dishes that cost 10,000 crystals? Gulp! Xiao Yu and his army also returned in a grandiose manner. When Ji Qingyu was captured, he was utterly disheartened. He had planned for so long, but in the end, all his efforts were in vain. As for the henchmen and remnants of King Yu's rebel army, the guards of the various large counties of the empire would soon begin to eliminate them. Even Duan Ling, who was at the divine physique echelon, was smashed into minced meat by the dog's paw, let alone them. All the civil and military officials squeezed their way up the city walls and looked at Ji Qingxue respectfully, waiting for his orders. The Supreme Elder and Wu Mu also walked into the store. The two of them did not dare to underestimate the store in the slightest. That terrifying expert, who seemed capable of destroying heaven and earth, was smashed to death by a dog within the Imperial City store just like that. Ji Qingxue was not a fool. Even though he had paid attention to this store in the past, he did not pay too much attention to it. The main reason was that he was familiar with the owner Bu, and the store's strength had never been as ridiculous as it was today. That expert, who was as valiant as a devil, was completely obliterated. The Light Wind Empire was once again spared from disaster. Perhaps this was karma. The two of them arrived in front of the deep pit, and when they saw the scene within, they both sucked in a breath of cold air. Ji Qingxue calmed himself down, and then he ordered his subordinates to start preparing and planning for the renovation of the Imperial City. When he saw the black dog that was sleeping soundly in front of the store, he became even more cautious. One could imagine the value of this. This dish contained the ingredient of a supreme beast, and it even saved his father's life. 10,000 crystals was definitely worth it. These were the impurities and toxins within his body. They were merely supreme beings who kept a low profile. Everyone was extremely noisy, chattering, whispering to each other, and constantly shouting to vent the shock in their hearts. Their minds were trembling, and their faces were filled with fear and excitement. Xiao Meng, who had his head lowered, suddenly raised it up. This kind of heart-wrenching thing was truly fatal. That was the place where Duan Ling was smashed to death by the black dog's paw. Xiao Yinyu clicked her tongue in her heart, but after thinking about it, she also understood. After dealing with a supreme beast, another supreme beast came. After beating away two supreme beings, an even more tyrannical supreme being came. The Supreme Elder and Wu Mu, who had just stepped into the store, seemed to have forgotten the purpose of their visit. They were all staring at the ingredients that Bufong had scooped out. Among the ingredients, there was a duck with golden skin and flesh, a blood phoenix chicken that seemed to be drenched in fresh blood, a piece of crystal clear meat, a black spirit abalone with a pale golden broth flowing through it, and all sorts of exotic delicacies. This was not a small project, so Ji Qingxue only briefly mentioned it. Ji Qingyu and Zhao Mushing were incomparably weak. These two were the leaders of the rebel army, and their status was extraordinary. However, at this moment, They were completely powerless to resist. Looking at the ruins of the imperial city, Ji Qingxue couldn't help but sigh. The imperial city covered a vast area, but this time, the battle had affected 2/3 of the imperial city. And Ai Yin, whose face was filled with longing, Yi Xiling, who was licking her lips, the excited Xiao Xiaolong, and the dumbfounded Supreme Elder in Wumu. These civil and military officials were now truly in awe of Ji Qingxue. On top of the city wall, Ji Qingxue's entire body was limp. A strained smile appeared on his face, and his eyes were filled with excitement. Leaning on the city wall, Ji Qingxue first looked toward the imperial city. He was afraid that the fat dog would suddenly swipe its paw down and turn them into minced meat. After drinking a bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall soup, Xiaoming's complexion rapidly improved. His skin, which was densely covered with poisonous veins, gradually returned to normal under the nourishment of the rich spirit energy of the soup. Why would such a powerful dog stay in front of the store to watch over it? Why would the store's owner dare to let this dog watch over the store? As of now, the status of Fong Fong's little store in his heart had risen higher and higher, reaching an extremely high position. When Bu Fong said these words, everyone was stunned. Then, they couldn't help but click their tongues. It was a good opportunity to assist the city guards in dealing with the rebel army. To Ji Qingxue, the current state of the enemy was simply a joyous occasion. As expected, there was nothing that owner Bu couldn't solve. After expelling these toxins and impurities, Xiao Meng's eyes suddenly widened, and the spirit energy around his body began to surge. Ji Qingxue's sharp senses told him that if he could protect this store, it would be an opportunity for the Light Wind Empire to become famous throughout the southern region. If even his base was destroyed, Ji Qingxue felt that there was no point in being an emperor. A huge boulder that had been weighing on his heart finally fell, and he felt a sense of relief. Dead. All of them were dead. The dignified divine physique echelon, the first person in the southern region to break through to the divine physique echelon, was actually smashed into pieces by a dog. At this moment, their feelings were somewhat complicated, and they didn't know what to say. The corners of Bu Fong's mouth twitched. Then he turned around to look at them. He was puzzled. Why was it so difficult to be an emperor? Over the past few days, so many supreme beings had appeared one after another, yet none of them could shake the store. Ji Qingxue shakily stood up with the support of the city wall. His legs were still slightly trembling, and he was truly frightened out of his wits. The continuous waves of supreme being experts attacking the imperial city almost scared the emperor to death. Heavens! Was he dreaming? Even though their houses and homes were in ruins, they could still be rebuilt. If the empire was gone, the citizens wouldn't be able to live for long. Ji Qingyu's army was incorporated into the army, and those who refused to obey were locked up in the dungeon. The majestic rebel army of King Yu was once again annihilated at this point. Even though there were only 10,000 guards in the imperial city, it was more than enough. Against such a weakened army, 10,000 guards was more than enough. This dish is called Buddha Jumps Over the Wall. There's only one dish, and since we are all friends, if anyone wants to try it, it will cost 10,000 crystals per bowl. The Light Wind Empire once again regained its peace. The Supreme Elder and Wu Mu looked at each other and saw the shock in each other's eyes. Then, the two of them walked down the city wall and slowly walked toward the huge crack. Now, there's even a bunch of supreme beings causing trouble and playing with people's hearts. He truly felt that it wasn't easy being an emperor. Ji Qingyu bitterly smiled and shook his head with disheveled hair. In the end, his cultivation was sealed by Xiao Yu, and he was locked up in the dungeon. Ji Qingxue clasped his hands behind his back as he looked at the disheartened Ji Qingyu. This time, there was no mercy on his face as he coldly stared at his own brother. Even though Ji Qingxue was still young, he couldn't withstand such torment. With a muffled groan, he opened his mouth and spouted out a mass of pitch-black energy. These waves of attacks were truly making him on tenterhooks. What was more important was the tens of thousands of Ji Qingyu's army outside of the imperial city. Among Ji Qingyu's army of tens of thousands, About half of them had their soul essence extracted by the high priestess and died. The moment he recovered, his cultivation reached a bottleneck and was about to break through. 7th grade battle saints and 8th grade war gods were as common as cabbages. Chapter 374. Outside the imperial city of the Light Wind Empire, a figure slowly approached from the distant horizon. This figure had a head full of vigorous gray hair. His aura was like that of a dragon, and his entire body was tall and straight. The gray-haired man's cultivation level was astonishing. As he walked, he seemed to bring about a gale that caused the surrounding vegetation to sway. The gray-haired man, who was brimming with the aura of an expert, was holding a roasted leg in his hand. It was unknown what kind of spirit beast meat this roasted spirit beast leg was. Because it was roasted to the point that it was a little charred, its appearance was unclear. If it wasn't for the fact that one could tell that it was a spirit beast leg from the general outline, one might think that this fellow was grabbing some charcoal and gnawing on it. Bah! Why is it so disgusting? Duan Yin took a bite of the roasted leg in his hand as he sped along. However, this bite that was filled with hope caused his mouth to be filled with bitterness. The roasted meat was unbearably bitter, like charcoal. It was so bitter that he almost teared up. He spat out the roasted meat in his mouth, and his face was filled with depression. Why can't I cook a delicious roasted leg using alchemic fire? Duan Yin threw away the roasted leg in disgust. His face was filled with depression. He was rushing from the 100,000 mountains to the imperial city of the Light Wind Empire. Logically speaking, with the speed of an 8th grade war god, he should be able to reach there in no time. However, he wasn't in a hurry. After leaving the 100,000 mountains, he encountered a 7th grade spirit beast on his way and accidentally killed it. He recalled the time when Bufang forced him to use alchemic fire to roast the delicious earth dragon meat. The golden and tender dragon meat, the glistening golden oil, and the overflowing fragrance all made Duan Yun's heart itch. Since a 7th grade battle saint like Bufang could cook such a delicious dish with the help of his alchemic fire, as the master of alchemic fire, Duan Yun's control over the alchemic fire was much better than Bufang's. How could he not be able to cook something delicious? His craving for food and his unwillingness to accept defeat made Duan Yun embark on the path of using alchemic fire to roast meat. Of course, even though alchemic fire wasn't as violent as a heaven and earth obsidian flame, it was still difficult to control. Of course, even though alchemic fire wasn't as violent as a heaven and earth obsidian flame, it was still difficult to control. Especially when it came to roasting meat, there were many ways to do it. Although Duan Yin had become much more proficient on the way here, the meat he roasted was like pig's feed. After eating the earth dragon meat roasted by Bufang and tasting the meat roasted by himself, it was indeed no different from pig feed. Duan Yun sighed in his heart as he tossed the roasted meat aside. He felt that he did not have the talent to be a chef. It was better for him to obediently remain as an alchemist. Although this alchemic fire was already on the path of no return for roasting meat. I seem to be late. From afar, Duan Yun could see the majestic city walls of the Light Wind Imperial capital. The city walls were in ruins and were filled with cracks. There was even a huge hole in the middle of the city walls. It was obvious that Duan Yun had arrived too late. The battle had already ended. Don't tell me that kid has already been killed. With so many supreme beings here, even a genius disciple of the Grand Baron sect would feel his balls ache. Duan Yin touched his chin and sighed. He was not worried about Bufang. Since he dared to snatch the 10,000 bestial flames, he should be prepared to be ganged up on by so many supreme beings. Moreover, Duan Yin was very clear that even if he managed to survive this wave of attacks from so many supreme beings, there would still be more storms waiting for Bufang. Because the appearance of the heaven and earth obsidian flames was enough to attract the attention of the Grand Baron sect, which used the southern region as a training ground. Duan Yin scratched his disheveled gray hair, exhaled, and continued on his way. On the flat ground in front of the imperial capital, There were many soldiers cleaning up the corpses of King Yu's soldiers who had their souls sucked dry. It was a bustling scene. Duan Yun clicked his tongue in wonder as he passed by the soldiers and stepped into the light-wind imperial capital. Xiao Meng's eyes emitted a monstrous spirit energy. The spirit energy vibrated around his body and formed a small spirit energy storm that whistled within the store. However, even though it formed a storm, it did not move the items within the store in the slightest. Xiao Yinyu's beautiful eyes were filled with surprise. Did her father profit from a disaster and obtain an opportunity to break through? Her father was finally going to break through. Xiao Meng had been stuck at the 7th grade Battle Saint realm for many years and had never found an opportunity to break through. Now that he was rescued from the brink of death, he completely broke through the shackles and stepped into the 8th grade War God realm. The Light Wind Empire also had an 8th grade War God. Ha ha! Xiao Meng, you have profited from a disaster and stepped into the War God realm. You are indeed the guardian of the Light Wind Empire. Laughter came from outside the store. Ji Qingxue walked in with a face full of exhaustion. Even though he was exhausted, when he saw that Xiao Meng was about to break through, his face revealed an expression of excitement. The Buddha jumps over the wall soup is filled with spirit energy. Moreover, with the flesh and blood of a supreme being as an ingredient, the spirit energy are extremely rich. After being processed with a special method, the spirit energy will be gentle and the spirit energy will flow. It is not strange for Xiao Meng to take advantage of this opportunity to break through a realm. Bu Feng, on the other hand, was very calm as he looked at Xiao Meng, whose aura was constantly surging and rising. Moreover, with his current experience, he could naturally see that Xiao Meng's increase in cultivation was not as simple as an ordinary 8th grade war god. The rich spirit energy was much more powerful than that of an ordinary 8th grade war god. This was the true meaning of a well-prepared cultivator. After a long whistle, the surging spirit energy surged out from Xiao Meng's mouth like a beam of light shooting into the sky. Only then did the surging aura on Xiao Meng's body gradually recede. Xiao Meng's hair fluttered as he opened his eyes. After the breakthrough, his pale face suddenly became ruddy, and he couldn't be more healthy. As for his body, which had been corroded by the poison, it was no longer fatigued and he had recovered a lot. Although he could still see the weakness in his body, he believed that it wouldn't take long for him to recover after breaking through. Xiao Meng spat out a mouthful of murky air. The breakthrough was finally over. Xiao Yinyu and Xiao Xiaolong were extremely excited. Xiao Yinyu was more reserved, while Xiao Xiaolong was almost waving his fists and shouting, "Thank you, Owner Bu, for saving my life." Xiao Meng looked at Bu Feng with a complicated expression. He knew that he owed him a big favor. This was no longer something that could be solved with 10,000 crystals. The favor that the Xiao family owed Bu Feng was as heavy as a mountain. Xiao Yinyu was saved by Bu Feng. Jiruer was also saved by Bu Feng. And he, Xiao Meng, was also saved by Bu Feng. His entire family was simply incredible. When he saw Bu Feng, he was a little embarrassed. The Supreme Elder glanced at Xiao Meng with interest. With his cultivation, he naturally did not care about Xiao Meng's breakthrough. He was a supreme being at the peak of the supreme being realm and a supreme being in the field of arrays. However, he was suddenly curious. According to his understanding, Xiao Meng was on the verge of death. Moreover, he was poisoned by the Shura sect. Under the torture of this kind of poison, his body should have been depleted long ago. Not to mention breaking through, even if he were to recover, his vitality would be greatly damaged. However, after Xiao Meng detoxified the poison, not only did his vitality not suffer, but he also broke through to the 8th grade War God realm. Moreover, he was not an ordinary 8th grade War God. His true energy level was close to that of an 8th grade War God. There was something strange. The Supreme Elder was puzzled. The White Cloud Villa's master, Wu Mu, naturally squinted his eyes and looked at Xiao Meng. Both of them had powerful cultivation levels and extraordinary experience. They could naturally see that something was wrong. Suddenly, the Supreme Elder's heart shook. He looked at Bufang and met Bufang's calm eyes. Xiao Ming recovered after drinking the dish cooked by Owner Bu. The rich fragrance of the dish filled the air, and the spirit energy and essence energy gushed out. Could it be that the dish made up for the loss of his true energy and vitality? This dish was not ordinary. Could it be that it was even more powerful than ordinary elixirs? Thinking of this, the Supreme Elder became curious. Owner Bu, can you give me a bowl of that soup? The white-haired, white-browed Supreme Elder smiled gently at Bufang. Bufang glanced at the old man, nodded his head, and replied calmly, "Of course. One bowl of soup costs 10,000 crystals." The Supreme Elder immediately pouted. What a scam. However, in order to verify his guess, the Supreme Elder still chose to drink a bowl. At his level, he naturally had a lot of crystals in his savings. Especially since he was a supreme being in the field of arrays. His need for crystals was much greater than that of ordinary cultivators. Owner Bu, I also want a bowl. And Yin came back to her senses. Her saliva almost dripped out of her delicate mouth. Oh, give me a scoop. The elder will help me pay for the crystals. And Yin's red tongue licked her delicate red lips. She immediately started extorting. The Supreme Elder had a lot of crystals. He was a super rich person. It was fine to eat from a rich person once in a while. And Yin thought happily in her heart. The Supreme Elder also smiled. This girl. Of course, Bufang would not refuse. He scooped a bowl of steaming soup for the white-bearded old man, which was placed in a blue and white porcelain bowl. The light golden soup emitted steam, and there was not a trace of oil on it. It looked very refreshing and delicious. The Supreme Elder took the bowl, and he first enjoyed the fragrance of the soup emitted from the bowl. He had to admit that even his old bones, which had lived for so many years, were intoxicated by the fragrance. The fragrance of the soup seemed to be able to hook people's souls. Facing the porcelain bowl, the Supreme Elder moved his mouth close to it and gently blew, as if he wanted to blow away the steam in the bowl. After blowing, the old man drank a mouthful of the scalding soup. Soup had to be scalding hot. Only then would one feel refreshed when drinking it. That boiling hot liquid flowed into the abdominal cavity, as if it was flowing through one's entire body, awakening all the cells in one's body. That feeling was very wonderful, and it was also the joy of drinking soup. This was the old man's current mood. A mouthful of soup flowed through his mouth and into his stomach. With a gurgling sound, it was as if his entire body was sublimated, and all the pores on his body opened up. His eyes suddenly widened, and a bright light shot out from them. There was only one word left in his mind: refreshing. After the refreshing feeling, the old man was even more shocked. The way he looked at Bufang became more and more incredulous, because he realized that after this mouthful of soup entered his stomach, rich essence and spiritual energy filled his body. The spiritual energy and essence were very gentle, and they were actually absorbed by his body. Moreover, the internal injuries he suffered during the battle with the Shura sect overlord, Duan Ling, were actually slowly recovering. This King soup was really more awesome than elixirs. Chapter 375. The Supreme Elder drank a mouthful of soup, and the gaze he used to look at Bufang became even more incredulous. He never thought that a bowl of soup could actually be more effective than a miracle elixir. A bowl of soup could actually heal injuries? The refinement of elixirs was extremely complicated and difficult. Moreover, the success rate was extremely low. The higher the grade of the elixir, the harder it was to refine. This was also the reason why alchemists had such a high status in the continent. However, right now, a mere bowl of soup from Bufang was actually comparable to an elixir. This was simply like using a sharp long sword to tear apart the norm. The Supreme Elder's eyes were filled with a strange expression. However, his mouth did not stop moving. He blew on the steaming hot soup and continued to drink another mouthful. His face was filled with enjoyment as he enjoyed the feeling of the hot soup flowing down his throat into his stomach. As the soup entered his stomach, there seemed to be a golden light blossoming in his lower abdomen. Warm energy spread out in all directions and flowed into his limbs and bones. The injuries on his body were actually healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. This effect was even more potent than an elixir. Oh my God, this was simply too unbelievable. Bufang glanced at the old man. Looking at the old man's constantly changing expression, Bufang faintly smiled. Green smoke curled around his hand, and the dragon bone kitchen knife appeared in his hand. Twirling the knife around, Bufang picked up the blood phoenix chicken that he fished out. Within the pitch-black darkness, a blade light flashed, and the blood phoenix chicken was cut into two halves. The blood-colored blood phoenix chicken leg floated in the air. Bufang held the dragon bone kitchen knife and casually tapped it with the back of the knife. The blood phoenix chicken drumstick flew toward the Supreme Elder. The Buddha jumps over the wall soup was not only delicious because of its soup, the ingredients that were simmered inside were even more delicious. The Supreme Elder's eyes lit up. The porcelain bowl in his hand shook and caught the chicken leg. Stroking his beard, the old man deeply inhaled the meaty aroma that was being emitted from the chicken leg. This meat is really fragrant. The Supreme Elder clicked his tongue and praised. Then he grabbed the drumstick and took a big bite. The soft muscles instantly flowed into the old man's mouth like flowing water. The chicken that seemed to have turned into threads shuttled back and forth between the old man's teeth like a massage, making him feel very comfortable. The chicken meat, which was wrapped under the tender chicken skin, emitted an aroma. The rolling aroma permeated the surroundings, causing everyone to involuntarily become intoxicated. The dragon bone kitchen knife continued to spin as Bufang slapped a chicken wing over to Xiaoming. Xiaoming took the chicken wing and cupped his hands respectfully toward Bufang, full of gratitude. And Yan's eyes lit up. She stared at Bufang and shouted, "I want one too." Bufang glanced at Yan, and the corners of his mouth twitched. With a flip of the dragon bone kitchen knife, the buttocks of the blood phoenix chicken were cut off. With a light toss, the buttocks of the blood phoenix chicken fell into Yan's porcelain bowl. "What is this? Chicken butt?" Yan's pretty face immediately stiffened. How infuriating! She rolled her beautiful eyes and glared at Bufang, but did not say anything. The buttocks of a chicken can beautify and nourish one's skin. The effect of the chicken but of the Buddha jumps over the wall soup is naturally even more obvious, Bufang earnestly said. "Owner Bu, give me a serving as well." Ji Qingxue was already tempted by the aroma that permeated the air. The aroma of the Buddha jumps over the wall soup was extraordinary. He had eaten Bufang's dishes in the past and naturally knew that the dishes made by Bufang were definitely of the highest quality. How could the taste be bad? After dividing up the blood phoenix chicken, Bufang put away the dragon bone kitchen knife. Everyone was eating with relish. There was a lingering fragrance in their mouths as the shiny oil densely covered their mouths. After Duan Yun entered the imperial city, he followed the aroma and found Fang's little store. The intoxicating aroma spread throughout the entire city. Duan Yun found it without spending much effort. When he arrived at the entrance of the store, he saw the ruins left behind by the battle. The sharp, true energy that permeated the air caused Duan Yun's mind to slightly tremble. It was obvious that an extremely terrifying battle had just taken place here. Moreover, with Duan Yun's experience, he could clearly feel the somewhat chaotic pressure of heaven and earth in the air. There was actually someone controlling the pressure of heaven and earth. Could it be that a battle between divine physique echelon experts had just taken place in the imperial city? The first stage of the 10th grade divine realm was the divine physique echelon. A battle between those realms. How could it happen in such a small place? He walked into the store and, as he expected, saw Bufang. He wanted to say something, but he was attracted by the aroma that permeated the air. He looked at the group of people around him who were eating with relish and making slurping sound from time to time. Duan Yin could not resist the temptation and also ordered a serving. Essence crystals were naturally nothing to him. After drinking a mouthful of soup, He completely forgot about the matter that he wanted to tell Bufang. Delicious. It tasted even better than the alchemy, fire-roasted meat. Duan Yun had never tasted such a delicious dish. He was suddenly moved. Wait a minute. This dish couldn't have been cooked with a heaven and earth obsidian flame, right? Duan Yun subconsciously asked as he recalled Bufang's annoying personality. However, Bufang did not hide anything and directly nodded. Tears streamed down Duan Yun's cheeks. As expected, this fellow was so extravagant as to use a heaven and earth obsidian flame to cook. That was the flame that all alchemists dreamed of. You're using that kind of heaven and earth treasure to cook? Didn't he know that it was a reckless waste of a treasure? Duan Ling felt a wave of suffocation in his heart. He also felt sorry for the heaven and earth obsidian flame. Previously, he was still feeling sorry for his alchemy fire, but he did not expect that compared to the heaven and earth obsidian flame, his alchemy fire was actually quite lucky. Owner Boo, I came here this time not only to taste your dish, but also to tell you a piece of bad news. Duan Yun grabbed a large piece of meat and chewed on it. He suddenly said, "The news that a heaven and earth obsidian flame has appeared in the southern region will spread quickly. Not long after, the powerful sect that has always regarded the southern region as a training ground will receive this news. They will definitely send people over. When that time comes, the people they send over will definitely have terrifying cultivation levels." Duan Yun reminded them, and continued to chew on the large piece of meat. The Supreme Elder and Wu Mu furrowed their brows, feeling a little fearful. At their level, they naturally knew how insignificant the southern region was. The sect that Duan Yun mentioned was the Grand Baron sect. It was a powerful sect that regarded the southern region as a training ground for its disciples. It was an enormous power with terrifying strength. For the disciples of the Grand Baron sect, the training ground was indeed not dangerous. However, a heaven and earth obsidian flame, like the 10,000 bestial flames, had appeared in a mere training ground. How could they let it go? A heaven and earth obsidian flame was something that could only be chanced upon. When the time came, the Grand Baron sect would definitely send experts to look for Bufang and ask for the 10,000 bestial flames. The Supreme Elder also mentioned this matter to Bufang, but Bufang didn't pay much attention to it. He had already eaten the 10,000 bestial flames, and it already belonged to him. How could he possibly spit it out? Bei Gongming led a few injured Grand Baron sect disciples through the dense forest of the 100,000 mountains. His complexion was extremely unsightly. His heart was filled with unwillingness, depression, an intense sense of helplessness and regret. Facing the 10,000 bestial flames and the heaven and earth obsidian flame, it would be a lie if he wasn't tempted. Originally, he thought that he could easily sweep away all the powers in the training ground and snatch the 10,000 bestial flames. However, he never imagined that there would be so many terrifying experts in this remote place. Existences that were half a step into the divine realm. A few pots made him unable to wake up for a long time, and strange existences that could even eat the heaven and earth obsidian flame. Because of these reasons, he had missed the opportunity to obtain the heaven and earth obsidian flame. His heart ached. The group of people slowly walked through the serene and dense forest. Soon, they walked out of the dense forest and arrived at a huge valley. A waterfall poured down like a silver river, emitting deafening rumbling sounds. The valley was filled with dense heaven and earth spirit energy. In the middle of the valley, there was a desolate palace. There were many figures walking in front of the palace. These figures were all wearing the same clothes and emitted extremely terrifying auras. There were several figures sitting cross-legged in the palace. One of them seemed to have sensed Bei Gongming's presence and slowly opened his eyes. It was as if there was a golden radiance bursting out from his eyes. It was so dense that it seemed as if it wanted to illuminate everything. Bei Gongming, who had just stepped into the palace, suddenly felt his heart tremble. It was as if he was being watched by an invisible eye. Deacon Feng, I have an urgent news to report. Bei Gongming really didn't want to divulge the information about the heaven and earth obsidian flame. However, he couldn't obtain it with his current strength. Conflicted, he still chose to divulge it. Chapter 376. What news? The middle-aged man slowly opened his eyes. There seemed to be a radiance circulating in his eyes as he gazed at Bei Gongming, causing Bei Gongming's heart to tremble. It was a pair of eyes that seemed to be able to see through one's thoughts. This pair of eyes made Bei Gongming's hair stand on end. Executive Feng was an expert sent by the Grand Baron's sect to oversee the training grounds. He was in charge of Bei Gongming's team. His cultivation was extremely powerful. Bei Gongming, who was at the middle stage of the Supreme Being realm, didn't even have the courage to look him in the eye. Executive Feng, I discovered a heaven and earth obsidian flame in the training grounds. Bei Gongming recalled how he had been humiliated by a group of country bumpkins. He felt a surge of anger in his heart. With his cultivation, he definitely wouldn't be able to get back at them. The kid who snatched the heaven and earth obsidian flame seemed to have an extremely powerful puppet. That puppet could fight against 5 supreme beings at once. If he went up alone, he would definitely be beaten up. Bei Gongming wasn't a fool. He sighed and told him the truth. Executive Feng's lazy gaze suddenly froze when he heard Bei Gongming's words. His sharp gaze was like a sharp longsword. In an instant, it seemed as though it was going to pierce Bei Gongming's heart. Bei Gongming's whole body trembled. What did you say? A heaven and earth obsidian flame appeared in the training grounds? Executive Feng's voice was filled with a sense of bewilderment. This training ground couldn't even produce a divine physique echelon cultivator. How could a heaven and earth obsidian flame be produced? Are you the fool, or am I? Executive Feng looked at Bei Gongming as though he was looking at a fool. Bei Gongming was dumbfounded. Executive Feng actually didn't believe him. He hurriedly told Executive Feng everything that happened in the 100,000 Mountains. After listening to Bei Gongming's story, Executive Feng's face became gloomy. You said that half of the team died because of a heaven and earth obsidian flame? Executive Feng's voice was ice cold. He looked at Bei Gongming, who felt a chill run down his spine. As the leader of the team, he was in charge of Bei Gongming's team. Now, Bei Gongming had actually run over to tell him that half of the team had died. This responsibility was completely on his head, and the sect would also demand an explanation from him. Executive Feng's cold and gloomy expression seemed to have caused the surrounding experts to slowly open their eyes. Astonished, they swept their gazes over where he was at. Executive Feng nodded his head at the few of them, then pulled Bei Gongming out of the central region of the Great Hall. This hall was the gathering place of the Grand Baron sect in the training grounds. Every time the disciples were sent to the training grounds, they would have to return to the Grand Baron's sect by stepping on the magic array. Is there really a heaven and earth obsidian flame? Are you trying to shirk your responsibility by making up a lie? Executive Feng pulled Bei Gongming into a room and asked coldly. Bei Gongming's heart trembled as he swore. If this disciple has lied to you, then both my body and soul will be destroyed. Executive Feng's eyes lit up when he heard Bei Gongming's oath. A heaven and earth obsidian flame. This barren southern region actually had a heaven and earth obsidian flame. This was an opportunity, a great opportunity. If he could obtain a heaven and earth obsidian flame, it would be a great merit, and he would be able to obtain many good items in the sect. A heaven and earth obsidian flame is indeed a good item. It's a pity that I have an important matter to deal with. Executive Feng clasped his hands behind his back and furrowed his brows. What is it? Is it more important than a heaven and earth obsidian flame? Bei Gongming was curious. Executive Feng glanced at him and snorted. Didn't you say that the heaven and earth obsidian flame has already been devoured and refined by someone? The monk can run, but the temple can't. You are now in charge of keeping a close eye on the person who devoured the heaven and earth obsidian flame, and keep in touch with me at all times. Once I'm done with the illusory spirit swamp's crystal mine, I'll rush over. Bei Gongming was stunned for a moment. Then he sucked in a breath of cold air. A crystal mine? That was an incredible item. The light wind Imperial City regained its peace and tranquility, although the ground was covered in rubble and many people's homes were destroyed. However, because Ji Qingxue had arranged for the guards of the Imperial City to disperse the crowd in advance, this disaster didn't cause too many casualties. As for the people whose houses were destroyed, Ji Qingxue arranged for them to stay in the plaza in front of the Imperial Palace. The gate of heavenly mystery was also opened, accommodating many people. Every family occupied a small area, and they were given some bedding and clothes. Although the commoners were dissatisfied with this, they knew that this was the best solution. At the same time, the restoration of the imperial capital was in full swing. The reconstruction of the houses, the repaving of the streets, and so on were all underway. The clanging sounds of construction echoed unceasingly. The warm morning sun rose above the horizon, casting a warm glow on people's hearts. Buffon got up from his bed with a dazed look on his face. Letting out a yawn, he washed his face and rinsed his mouth before slowly heading downstairs. The kitchen was very quiet. Ever since Yu Fu returned to the illusory spirit swamp, the kitchen was missing an energetic figure. As for Xiao Xiaolong, he wasn't as energetic. Buffon used a fine velvet rope to tie up the ends of his hair, rolled up his sleeves, and walked into the kitchen while twisting his neck. Buffon arrived in front of his own stove and picked up the extremely heavy kitchen knife. He yawned and began to methodically practice his cutting and carving techniques. Although his cooking skills had improved a lot compared to when he first arrived, this kind of daily training couldn't be skipped. This was because it trained a chef's foundation. Only when one's foundation was firmly grasped could a tall building rise from the ground. After putting away the kitchen knife, Buffon took out a few pieces of tenderloin meat from the system's dimensional storage and prepared to cook sweet and sour ribs for Blackie. Looking at the tenderloin meat, Buffon suddenly froze. I almost forgot. That fat dog is going to eat the sweet and sour supreme dragon meat ribs today. Buffon smacked his lips and conveniently put away the tenderloin meat. He walked in front of the cupboard and took out the supreme dragon tenderloin meat that was placed inside yesterday. Green smoke curled up, and the dragon bone kitchen knife appeared. After chopping off a few pieces of dragon tenderloin meat and cleaning it, Buffon took out the black turtle constellation wok. The pitch black and heavy black turtle constellation wok emitted a simple and unadorned aura. It continuously rotated above his palm and finally became the size of a normal wok. With a loud bang, it was placed on the stove. Rubbing his nose, Buffon took a step back, and his face became slightly flushed. Then, he opened his mouth and spat out a ball of golden flames. The flames darted into the bottom of the black turtle constellation wok and began to burn quietly. This method of lighting the fire made Buffon feel a little embarrassed, as if he was the incarnation of the Calabash brothers. What followed was an orderly cooking process. Buffon could recite the cooking process of sweet and sour ribs with his eyes closed, and the cooking process was even more skillful. Moreover, it was not the first time he used dragon meat to make sweet and sour ribs, so he was very experienced. After the supreme fire dragon meat was dipped in oil, its fragrance was incomparably mellow. It slowly floated up, and it constantly tickled one's taste buds. Even Buffon couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. Smelling this fragrance, Buffon couldn't help but think of the Buddha jumps over the wall dragon claw that he ate the day before. Delicious, Buffon muttered. Sizzle. The flames in the wok surged, then disappeared. Buffon shook his ladle, scooped up the tangerine red juice from the wok, and poured it onto the dragon meat that had already been processed. Puff! Steam rose up, and white steam rolled out. It was accompanied by an explosive fragrance, which intoxicated one and made one unable to extricate themselves. Supreme dragon meat sweet and sour ribs. If others knew about this dish, they would surely be scared out of their wits. Who would dare to eat it? Picking up the fragrant sweet and sour ribs, Buffon furrowed his brows, as if he had thought of something. He put down the sweet and sour ribs and didn't rush to bring it over to Blackie. Blackie, who was standing at the entrance, had already opened its eyes wide while Bufong was cooking sweet and sour ribs. It peeked through the crack of the door. Its nose twitched as it sniffed the fragrance in the air. The Lord Go couldn't wait any longer. Bufong took out the purple spirit fruit tree from the system's dimensional storage, which he had dug up from the 100,000 mountains. He planted it in a corner of the store, and it resonated with the Five Stripes Path Understanding tree. After planting the purple spirit fruit tree, Bufong noticed that the space within the store had expanded by a lot, and it seemed to have become much more spacious. The tables and chairs within the store were also unknowingly replenished. Did the system unknowingly expand the store? Bufong thought excitedly in his heart. However, Bufong was only excited for a moment. He poured water for the purple spirit fruit tree and took out a bowl of refreshing fruit juice. Refreshing fruit juice, fragrant sweet and sour ribs. Even Bufong was drooling just by looking at it. After opening the store's door, Blackie's dog ears twitched. It took several steps back and excitedly stared at Bufong. The corners of Bufong's mouth curled up as he placed the sweet and sour supreme dragon meat ribs and the purple spirit fruit juice in front of Blackie. "Today, I will add a drink for you. The taste is pretty good," Bufong lightly said as he rubbed Blackie's spotless fur. "Oh," Blackie looked at Bufong in astonishment. This kid knows how to show filial respect to the Lord Go. With a satisfied snort, the Lord Go impatiently gobbled up the sweet and sour supreme dragon meat ribs that Bufong had placed on the table. It had been looking forward to eating this sweet and sour ribs for a long time. Delicious woof. After a piece of sweet and sour supreme dragon meat ribs entered his mouth, the Lord Go felt so happy that he almost shed tears. He was completely intoxicated by the sweet and sour supreme dragon meat ribs and was unable to extricate himself. His dog's tail was wagging rapidly. The Lord Go loved the sweet and sour supreme dragon meat ribs, and the sweet and sour supreme dragon meat ribs loved the Lord Go. This was the Lord Go's happy day. Bufong rubbed Blackie's head once more. He stood up and walked back into the store. He pulled a chair and comfortably curled up on it. As the warm sunlight shone down from the sky, his eyes once again became empty and spacious. Bufong really enjoyed this kind of leisurely life. He yawned and almost fell asleep. However, just as he closed his eyes, the system's voice resounded in his mind. The sudden voice almost scared the relaxed Bufong to death. Chapter 377. Temporary Mission. Host, please proceed to the illusory spirit swamp and fight for the big crystal mine's crystal source. Host, open the treasure contained within the crystal source and use the treasure to cook a dish. Mission reward: 20% of your true energy cultivation. The solemn and earnest voice of the system resounded in the drowsy Bufong's mind. It was like an alarm clock ringing in his ears while he was half asleep, and it almost scared him to the point that he fell off the chair he was curled up in. Bufong opened his eyes. There was a hint of confusion in his eyes. He patted his chest with a dark expression on his face. "System, can you give me a warning when you issue a mission next time? Don't suddenly give me a warning. You'll scare me to death." Bufong calmed himself down and said with dissatisfaction, "The temporary mission will start in 3 days. Host, please prepare in advance. This mission requires Little Black to follow the host. Host, please conquer Little Black within 3 days. If Little Black is unwilling to go, it will be judged that the host has failed the temporary mission, and 10% of the true chi cultivation reward will be deducted." The host was still as solemn as ever. However, the content of the system's words made Bufong raise his brows. He was extremely astonished and puzzled. This time, Blackie was actually going to accompany him? Wasn't it supposed to be Xiao Bai? Why did it become Blackie, that lazy dog? Bufong blinked his eyes and turned his head to look at Blackie, who was eating the fragrant sweet and sour ribs on a porcelain plate. Bufong couldn't help but grin. Does the system want me to convince Blackie to accompany me to complete this temporary mission? Bufong muttered. "That's right, host." The system's words suddenly jumped out. Bufong, who was deep in thought, was startled once again. Are you sure you're not joking with me? Trying to convince this lazy dog to accompany me? Xiaobai is so good. He's obedient and cute. His chubby belly feels so good to the touch. This fat dog? Sigh, let's not talk about it. Bufang felt a little tired. However, at the same time, he was also a little surprised because the reward for this temporary mission was really tempting. The reward of 20% of true qi cultivation could save a lot of business time for Bufang. Bufang felt that he needed to work hard for the reward of 20% true qi cultivation. Wasn't it just a lure of fat dog? He was so handsome. He could definitely do it. Just as Bufang was deep in thought, a few figures quickly walked in from outside the store, interrupting Bufang's thoughts. Bufang looked up. It was none other than Enai, Yin, and the white-bearded old man. Behind Enai, Yin were the Xiao siblings. The dejected look on Xiao Xiaolong's face had already disappeared. His complexion was rosy and glossy. His skin was fair and delicate, and he was full of vigor. Honorbu, good morning. Xiao Xiaolong happily greeted Bufang. However, Bufang did not reply to him. He only looked at him indifferently until Xiao Xiaolong's face was as red as a monkey's butt. He rushed into the kitchen and started practicing. If you come so late again, you know the consequences. Bufang stood up from the chair and said to Xiao Xiaolong, who had already entered the kitchen. Xiao Xiaolong suddenly staggered. His heart was filled with grief and indignation. Sister Yufu is not here. You only know how to bully me. Xiao Yinyu gently looked at Bufang. She raised her slender hand and took out a huge pouch. The pouch was filled with crystals, and she handed it to Bufang. Honorbu, this is 10,000 crystals. However, no amount of crystals is enough to express the gratitude of our Xiao family to Honorbu. Xiao Yinyu said with a hint of gratitude and sincerity as she stared at Bufang with her watery eyes. Her words made Bufang a little embarrassed. However, Bufang did not know whether it was because he was thick-skinned or something else, but his expression did not change in the slightest. He simply received the pouch as if it was a matter of course and put it away. Ouyang Xiaoyi cheerfully walked into the store while humming a little tune. After staying in the store for so long, she quickly noticed that the store was different. After walking around the path understanding tree and the newly planted purple spirit fruit tree, she realized that the store seemed to have become much more spacious. Smelly boss, the store seems to have become bigger. Ouyang Xiaoyi stared at Bufang and asked, Oh, it has expanded. Bufang calmly replied without explaining anything. He was currently worrying about how to convince Blackie to go with him on a mission. The crystal mine in the illusory spirit swamp? When Bufang thought of the location of the temporary mission, he could not help but feel surprised. It was the illusory spirit swamp again. Moreover, what was a crystal mine? Was it any different from the crystal mine in Fatty Jin's house? Host, please note that crystal mines are ordinary veins that are buried deep underground to produce crystals. They do not contain any crystal sources, so the crystals produced are of poor quality and contain a lot of impurities. Big origin crystal mines are also large origin crystal mines that are buried deep in the ground and nurture countless origin crystals. Big origin crystal mines contain crystal sources, and the origin crystals produced are of high quality and have few impurities. They are the currency of the hidden dragon continent and are essential for cultivation. The system explained to Bufang. Bufang suddenly understood. In short, a crystal mine was a crystal mine. However, it was much more abundant than a crystal mine. Moreover, it contained crystal sources, and the target of Bufang's temporary mission was the crystal sources. Normally, a large crystal mine will produce 3 crystal sources. One of them is a solid crystal source, so its value is quite low. The other 2 are non-solid crystal sources, so their value is quite high. There is a mysterious object hidden within the crystal sources. This mysterious object could be a precious medicine from the ancient times, or it could be some mysterious creature. The system would explain new terms to Bufang in a timely manner. This was because this would determine whether Bufang would be able to complete the temporary mission. After listening to the system's description, Bufong suddenly felt that the crystal sources were quite interesting. System, do you think there might be an ancient divine dragon hidden within the crystal sources? Bufong guessed. Host, please do not worry. It is impossible for the crystal sources of a crystal mine to contain an ancient divine beast. This is because the energy provided by a crystal mine is not enough to make a divine beast hibernate. Bufong curiously asked the system about the temporary mission. Yin and the others had already ordered their dishes. After Ouyang Xiaoi told Bufong the names of the dishes, Bufong directly entered the kitchen and started cooking. The Supreme Elder sat on a chair and looked at Bufong's back as he entered the kitchen with a profound look in his eyes. The injuries on his body had already recovered after he consumed the Buddha jumps over the wall soup the day before. The effects of that dish were even more powerful than elixirs. This was the first time the Supreme Elder sized up the store so seriously and solemnly. The more he looked at it, the more apprehensive he became. Regardless of whether it was the mysterious Bufong, the plump dog that was crouching at the entrance and gobbling down its food, or the iron puppet that was meticulously standing in the kitchen, all of them emitted a mysterious aura. He took out several jade talismans and started to make deductions. It seemed like he was trying to deduce some clues about Bufong. He guessed that it was impossible for a terrifying existence like the black dog to become a watchdog in a land of mortals. Bufong definitely had an extraordinary identity. Could it be that he was the son of some expert from the Hidden Dragon continent? Or could it be that some almighty expert had concealed his divine ability and was pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger? The more he thought about it, the more curious he became. However, before he could start to deduce anything, the Supreme Elder's mind trembled. His whole body seemed to be suffocated, causing him to tremble uncontrollably. An oppressive aura was emitted from the store, causing the jade talismans in his hand to shatter. The Supreme Elder's whole body was in a trance, and his complexion became pale. His heart suddenly shivered, and he calmed his mind. He didn't dare to make any other movements. Without a doubt, this store was too king scary. He wanted to find some clues from the heavens and was almost devoured. Fortunately, he was mentally prepared and gave up quickly. Yin looked at the Supreme Elder with a puzzled expression. Looking at the shattered divination talismans on the table, this outrageously beautiful woman curled her lips. She didn't care about Bufong's identity. She only cared about whether Onerbu's dishes were delicious or not. What did Onerbu's identity have to do with her? Fragrant dishes were carried out from the kitchen and placed on the table. Yin's eyes immediately lit up, and she couldn't wait to start eating heartily. The Supreme Elder looked at Bufong with reverence in his eyes, which made Bufong feel a little puzzled. Why did this old man's eyes suddenly become so strange? Could it be that he had become more handsome? However, he was too lazy to pay attention to this old man. After he finished cooking all the dishes, he leisurely walked to the door. Under the puzzled gazes of the people in the store, Bufong pulled up his pants and squatted down. He looked at the black dog that was eating nonstop from the porcelain bowl and smiled foolishly. Chapter 378. Illusory Spirit Swamp, Grand Serpent Men City. The majestic Grand Serpent Men City was situated in the middle of the illusory Spirit Swamp. The city was extremely majestic, and its towering city walls almost covered the entire sky. On top of the city walls, serpent men guards wielding swords and sabers stood guard. These serpent men were full of vigor, and a sharp glint could be seen in their eyes. The Grand Serpent Men City was built by the Serpentine Sovereign, and it was the home of all serpent men. Every serpent man had a strong sense of belonging to the city, and they couldn't help but feel proud of themselves when they stayed in the city. Many serpent men tribes in the illusory spirit swamp would come to the Grand Serpent Men City as if they were paying their respects. The illusory spirit swamp was situated above the Light Wind Empire, but its west side was connected to the vast ocean, and its surface area was extremely vast. The ocean was a mysterious place to everyone. At this moment, at the border of the ocean, on top of a precipitous cliff, An enchanting figure was proudly standing there. This was a Naga. She had a beautiful face and a head full of green hair that fluttered in the sea breeze. Her lower body was that of a green serpent, and her upper body was that of a human. This was the Serpentine Sovereign of the Grand Serpentman City. The Serpentine Sovereign's tail coiled as she stood on the precipitous cliff. Her beautiful eyes gazed at the surging waves that were crashing down from the cliff. The waves surged up to the sky and blew away the water vapor. The water vapor was somewhat salty, and this was the smell of the ocean. Although the vast ocean was full of unknowns, it was extremely tempting to experts because the opportunities in the ocean were no less than those on the continent. The Serpentine Sovereign had already reached the bottleneck of the Supreme Being realm. She originally wanted to snatch the 10,000 bestial flames to evolve and break through to a higher level, but in the end, she failed. She didn't manage to snatch the 10,000 bestial flames. Without the 10,000 bestial flames, it would be extremely difficult for her to break through the shackles of the Supreme Being realm. Therefore, she only had one thought in her mind, and it could even be said that she had already made up her mind. After dealing with the matters in the Grand Serpentman City, she would head to the boundless ocean in search of the opportunity to break through the shackles of the Supreme Being realm and step into the 10th grade divine realm. In a swamp several hundred miles away from the Grand Serpentine City, many young and strong serpentmen were hard at work. A huge pit was dug out of the swamp, and the slowly flowing mud exuded a fishy stench. At the bottom of the hole, boundless spiritual energy soared into the sky. The faces of the serpentmen were filled with excitement. They kept coming out of the pit and bringing out crystals that were stained with black swamp mud. The crystal shone resplendently, and its quality was very good. Baijan stood upright with his hands behind his back. Even though he was standing on the swamp, he did not stain it at all. He looked at the pit in the swamp with excitement in his eyes. At the bottom of this pit was a crystal mine with a sizable amount of reserves. This crystal mine had been discovered not too long ago. The Grand Serpentine City and the White Cloud Villa had fought over it, but in the end, they decided to jointly develop this crystal mine. As the excavation continued, Baijan became increasingly alarmed. He discovered that the size of this crystal mine had exceeded his expectations. It was so big that it was hard to imagine. Such a huge origin crystal mine could definitely increase the strength of the White Cloud Villa by a large margin. "Smelly boss, what is he doing?" She looked at Bufong, who was squatting in front of Blackie and had a silly smile on his face. She was puzzled. Bufong's silly smile was really unsightly. Blackie, who was slurping his bowl of sweet and sour Supreme Dragon meat ribs, noticed Bufong, who was squatting in front of him, and had a silly smile on his face. The Lord Go's eyes widened when he saw Bufong smile, and all the fur on his body stood on end. What was Bufong trying to do? The Lord Go raised his head. His mouth was still stained with the orange juice of the sweet and sour ribs. With a wave of his paw, he picked up the porcelain plate in front of him and stared at Bufong vigilantly. No one should think about snatching the sweet and sour ribs from the Lord Go. The sweet and sour ribs were with the dog. If anyone wanted to snatch the sweet and sour ribs, they would have to ask the permission of the Lord Go's paw. The Lord Go bared his teeth at Bufong, revealing his pure, white canine teeth. Between his teeth, there were still a few strands of tender meat, and his dog tail wagged. The smile on Bufong's face froze. His sincere and gentle smile couldn't move the Lord Go. Bufong rubbed his stiff face, and he couldn't help but mutter in his heart. Could it be that the way he smiled just now was wrong? Glancing at the Lord Go, Bufong let out a breath. The corners of his mouth curled up, and he revealed a smile that made the hair on the dog's body stand on end. What the hell was he smiling for? The Lord Go really wanted to slap Bufong away. Why did he come over and smile for no reason? Why did he have to smile in such a frightening manner? The Lord Go snorted, and he couldn't be bothered with Bufong. With a shake of his tail, he turned his body around, and his butt faced Bufong. Then he continued to bury his head in the porcelain bowl of fragrant sweet and sour Supreme Dragon meat ribs. Bufong's face became expressionless, and he felt a little defeated in his heart. Was his smile not infectious enough? Was his smile not warm enough? After thinking for a while, Bufong gave up on the idea of using his smile to move Blackie. How could a dog understand his charming smile? Grabbing Blackie's tail, which was constantly wagging, Bufong slightly tugged it. Blackie instantly turned its head in anger, and it glared at Bufong as it continued to bare its teeth. "Turn around and eat. Let's discuss something," Bufong said calmly. Blackie was taken aback. With a snort, it turned around to face Bufong and continued to bury its head in the porcelain bowl. "Blackie, look at you. You've been lying in front of the store every day, and you've become fat. How could a body like this attract female dogs? The next time I go out to do a mission, you should come with me. At the same time, you can exercise your body and make it slimmer to attract female dogs," Bufong said in all seriousness. Attract female dogs? The Lord Go was so coquettish, and he was emitting an astonishing charm from the inside out. Did he still need to use that vulgar appearance to decorate himself? Blackie rolled its eyes at Bufong's words, too lazy to pay him any attention. Bufong felt bitter. It was all his fault for spoiling this fat dog. "Blackie, you can't give up on yourself. For a better tomorrow, you need to stand up and change yourself. Only then will you be happy in the future." Bufong tried to persuade it. "Go out with the boss, see the world, and lose weight." Blackie didn't intend to pay attention to Bufong, who didn't know what was wrong with his brain. It immersed itself in eating the sweet-in sour ribs. The sweet-in sour ribs made with the supreme dragon meat was simply too delicious. The more it ate, the more fragrant it became. The fruit juice was also very delicious. Eating sweet-in sour ribs while drinking fruit juice was simply the most perfect dog life. Bufong felt that he was being ignored again. He realized that he couldn't even compare to a sweet-in sour ribs. It seemed that he could only use his trump card. Bufong's face was serious. He squatted down and looked at Blackie seriously. "Don't you like sweet-in sour ribs?" "Very well. Blackie, do you want to go out with me? If you don't, then don't ever think about eating sweet and sour ribs again. If you can eat sweet and sour ribs, consider it my loss." Little guy, if I don't cook sweet and sour ribs for you, am I not afraid that you will obediently give in?" Bufong calmly thought to himself. The corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl up, revealing a creepy smile. Blackie's movements suddenly froze. Then it raised its dog head, and its dog eyes just happened to see the hair-raising smile on Bufong's face. Then it stuck out its dog tongue, snorted, and continued to eat sweet and sour ribs. It was as if a gust of cold wind blew past, blowing up Bufong's hair, making him feel somewhat miserable. Why wasn't Blackie worried about his threat at all? Could it be that even if he didn't cook sweet and sour ribs as a punishment, he still wouldn't be able to subdue Blackie? Blackie indeed didn't care about Bufong's threat. Wasn't it just not giving him sweet and sour ribs? In the days without sweet and sour ribs, the Lord Go would be fine after a good sleep. If he slept for a few hundred years, why would he eat sweet and sour ribs? Using sweet and sour ribs to threaten the Lord Go. How naive. Feeling stifled, Bufong straightened his body and shook his somewhat stiff legs. This lazy dog, why was it so difficult for him to go out for a stroll? All he knew was to eat and sleep, sleep and eat. How could he find a beautiful female dog like this? Bufong clasped his hands behind his back and strolled in front of the store. From afar, Ji Qingxue was striding over. Beside him were a few little eunuchs who were jogging over. They were rushing toward the store. Meanwhile, Bufong's pacing figure suddenly stopped, as if he had thought of something. He turned his head to look at Blackie and calmly said, "How about this? You come with me for a stroll on a mission, and in the future, I'll double the amount of sweet and sour ribs. Double the amount, double the amount, double the amount, double the amount." Blackie's ears twitched, and it abruptly pulled its head out from the porcelain plate. Its dog eyes emitted a bright light as it stared straight at Bufong, giving Bufong a fright. Bufong raised his eyebrows and stared straight at Blackie. Blackie stuck out its tongue and licked its lips. Then it slowly raised its dainty and exquisite dog paw. Ji Qingxue, who was excitedly walking over from afar, was instantly startled. Both of his legs turned to jelly. What's wrong with the Lord Go? Did I offend him in some way? Why is he raising his dog paw? If there's anything, we can talk it out. Don't raise your paw. It's too dangerous. The Lord Go's eyes were bursting with excitement. 2 fingers on its dainty dog paw popped out with a snap. Double the amount, and double the amount of sweet and sour ribs. Otherwise, there's no deal. The gentle and magnetic voice of the Lord Go resounded. Bufong was silent for a moment. With an expressionless face, he said, "Deal." At this moment, Bufong was somewhat speechless. This dog already had no moral integrity. It turned out that conquering it was so simple. It was just a matter of adding a few more pieces of sweet and sour ribs. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.